The Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, a nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could I have the roll call vote, please?
Jason Tron.
Here.
Julie Simpson.
Here.
Jeff Bard.
Here.
Robin Cleek. Here. Wes Poland. Here. Matt Jacob.
Here.
Sonali Patel.
Here. First, anybody from the public wishes to comment? Okay. The first item on the agenda is the proposed 2018-19 student fees.
Good evening. You may recall from our last meeting, we recommended that we maintain all fees to be the same, for there to not be an increase for the 2018-19 school year, with the exception of lunch fees, and that is to comply with the equity in school lunch pricing provision. So that would go from $2.80 to $2.90. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions? One, two. Thank you, Abe. Next, the kindergarten building update by Superintendent Brown.
Yes, thank you. I just thought I would like to update everybody that might be watching and for the board here that we, as you recall, went through a schematic design phase. We are now in the design development phase, which provides more detail to materials, systems, alternate pieces that might be for the building as they prepare for bids. And we are about finished with that. We're hoping to have that completed and ready to bring to the board for some conversations at the January 22nd meeting. It provides more specifics for the types of equipment or the types of materials that might be used, and then what alternates might be there as well. This phase gets us about roughly halfway through the design documentation portion, where you're creating documents that will go out for bids, and that's where the companies will bid to do the work, and then they can use, it has so much detail in there, it can tell you exactly how much it would cost for them to do certain parts of the job. This is kind of takes away some of the unknowns. When you're in the schematic, it's a general dollar amount, with general designs. This hopefully then takes away some of the unknowns about certain materials. But we're moving along well, and we hope to have that material into Lamp's hands by before the holiday break in December, and then be able to bring some information to the board meeting in January and review some of that materials. But it is a good process. Teachers have been involved and given some feedback on some of the items. And we did have a meeting with the village, excuse me, last week, or the week before, presenting the layout of the building and traffic patterns, and that went well. And it looks as though that we've got some cooperation with the library and the village and the park district on Access Drive coming off Phillips Road behind the building, so that we'll get traffic off of Aspen Drive, depending on how that road's used. It has not been determined yet if it's drop-off by cars or if it's drop-off by buses. But that also helps us move further with the development of this project.
Any questions by the board for Nick? Any specifics?
Is there a review required by the Regional Board of Education, and when does that occur, if there is?
The park district's building the building. The regional office will, I'm working on that right now. So if we were building it, there would be some review, but the regional office, we're coordinating that work with the village and the regional office, because the park district is building it, making sure that it's fits all the needs and requirements for a school building. I don't have the date on that process yet, and I don't have the date for the next step. These drawings then will go to the village for technical review as well, that they're finishing.
So to piggyback on Jeff's question, even though it's being technically built by the park district and approved by the village, why wouldn't the Regional Board of Education be interested if it's going to house students in public school?
They'd be interested in it. because it's going to house, but they wouldn't have necessarily direct approval over it because it's not, it's being built by the park district. So we're coordinating those efforts between all.
Okay. I'm sorry, did you mention if or when we're gonna figure out who's paying for this access drive?
That's still being worked on through all parties. I have informed all parties that our budget is 12, and we're at 12 at this point, but everybody's looking at how they can work towards trying to help that. And at that meeting, Park District had said something about possibly putting some funds towards the access drive, as it would be utilized by them as well.
Any more questions regarding the kindergarten building?
Sure, isn't there so hung up on rivalry? Like why that way?
We couldn't gain permission to go through the atrium. It's owned by a different person, and it would impact their ability to lease portions of the
Okay.
building. So Phillips Drive was the next possible. They didn't want access through the center, the forgot the name of the complex right there. Through
Victory.
Thank you. The Victory Center parking lot. There was potential of having buses come through there, but they wanted to use Phillip Road instead of the Victory parking lot.
So if this road gets built going forward, is it considered a village road? Like who's responsible for snowplow removal and stuff like that?
Still working on those details. Right now, I would assume it would be the village, but we're still working through some of those details on how that would be shared responsibility.
Is that still going to be like gated access like they had
Yes.
talked about?
There'd be a gate at Phillips, and there'd be a gate. The road actually, the access road would go all the way through to the Sullivan Center parking lot. There'd be a gate at both that we would control. And then for evening events, the park district would like to open both of those depending on what they would need.
Anything else? Okay. The next is, before we get into our discussions, at the last meeting, we had the Humanex report, which was done. We had a slight delay in getting the presentation to us, so a lot of, we couldn't study the presentation in details. So are there any follow-up questions that the board has that they want answered or done?
I had a few questions. You can go first, Wes.
In the one presentation I sent for the Hawthorn District 73, the overall, there were last slide, so it says bottom 10 rank order by mean. There's only 5 there. And then on the next slide, it says top 10 rank ordered by mean. And again, there's only 5. Are we missing slides with the other 5?
Let me look and see. I don't think so, but I will find out. While I'm looking for that, if you had another question.
You have more, go ahead. Shoot. You might end up asking something I was gonna ask anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did everybody hear that? It's not really that.
Speaking in the microphone.
Some of the plugs were off, so can you check if your this thing is?
The people that work in the maintenance facility on Tower Road take Humanex?
No. Really assigned by the school buildings.
Right, but if we're trying to gauge employee and staff morale, seem that would be relevant. Did the people in the district office take it then? I'm guessing no.
No. We have it in the buildings with our non-certs and our certifieds within there. Because it's done by location by building, and then that generates a report.
Right, but then how do we ever get feedback about the people that sit at this fine building all day? How do we get feedback about not only how they're feeling, but about how people feel about them?
Well, in the listening tours that I go out to the buildings, I would get feedback from. We do some surveys through some of our work with PD, some of those others. They wouldn't necessarily directly connect to particular position here. If it's something to do with payroll, something to do with insurance, then somebody has a question or concern, or the union has a question or concern, they bring it to myself, Lynn, Lisa, and we review those. Abe, if it depends on the business department in that regard.
Okay. I don't know why, like, the last couple years, that didn't jump out to me like it did this year.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if it was just because this time we saw just a more summative building presentation rather than a complete thing, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like listening tours are great, but it takes away the advantage of being anonymous like you can in HumanX. And then, I feel like the teaching staff especially has so much contact with the curriculum department and the professional development department, and those are all things that contribute to the entire picture. So I would love to know their feelings on it.
No, they can tell about the department. Just the people here don't take the thing, right?
Right.
It's not really that they can tell about that department specifically. It's still answered within trying to keep their building in mind. I mean, that's the way
Yeah.
the questions, that's the way the survey is presented, is keeping in mind the building you work in, There's a few items that you could kind of extrapolate into the entire district. Like, I feel in on things happening in District 73, or I feel I can communicate with, my superiors. Like, there's some things that are more general to the whole district, but vast majority is very building specific.
Let me look and see if there's a way we can create that. There are several other districts that use HumanX around here, and I can ask how they've assigned one of the other, like a tower or a building, how they assign that. Get confused. And Wes, for your question, yeah, it does say bottom 10 ranked ordered by mean, and it just has 5. I will have to ask HumanX. I didn't catch that because I was looking at the previous bottom 5 items, so I think my brain was just saying 5. So I'll have to ask them if there's if I'm missing a sheet, because they put that together and sent it to me.
Okay, thanks. I also have another question. On the slides where it lists last year's goal setting, is this results, are these just used per building? Are they used district-wide? And what is being done to address the ones that actually didn't go up, they went down?
We use it both at building and district level. So what we do is we take these and we sit down in each building and we go over those. Say, what were the things that we did that we saw made a difference? What are some areas that we need to work on if something went down or stayed the same, but we were trying to make a goal to theirs? So they have a conversation. We do that as a building level, and then we get those sent up to the district, and then we as an administrative team look at those as the district and say which ones have moved up or down, and how can we build some interventions at a district level to help support. So I feel in on things is one of the items in the bottom 5 went down a little bit. So how can we further help communicate the goings on or the decision making or the processes within the district? We've tried with, some changes in our newsletters, changes with our internal newsletters, changes with how we do some committees, make them larger or smaller, and those types of things. So if it went down, then we got to go back and try to figure out what can we do to try to make sure folks feel that they're informed in a timely manner so they understand that. But we kind of glean that back out from the building and say, having the conversation with folks, why would you feel that you're not in on things? What is it that we need to do? And then we build a district level intervention to try to help support what they're doing in the buildings as well.
Okay, and then my last question. Looking at these results, I see that some buildings went up, some stayed the same, some went down. In the buildings such as Elementary South, since their goals, increased, are you sharing, what they did to help make it better with the other buildings?
Yeah, we sit down and have a conversation. Again, why did we see a significant change or a change? What have you done differently? And then that comes back, and then the whole administrative team has a conversation. Here's what we did, and we saw this made a difference. here's what we did. We did, one of the goals in one of the buildings was to really try to help with recognition. Principal went through all sorts of efforts with their staff on how to get recognition. Didn't really move the needle. So we got to go back and say, what is that person, what do they want? But if we saw that moved in another building, we'd ask, what did you do? And see if they're the same. Sometimes what works in one building won't work in another because there's personality to the group, sort of line the recognition. But we do, in short, to your answer, we do sit down and look at what does each administrative team, what is each building doing that we see gets positive results, and then how can we replicate those somewhere else, make more. So we do the same as you get ready for the academic achievement. We do the same thing there. We see a bump, we see a movement, say in a grade level or a subgroup or a particular building. What's occurring to make that move if we're not seeing it somewhere else? What's the difference that has caused that change?
Anything else?
Is there some form of this that can be completed by like our building administration about central office? About how they're feeling with the district?
I can ask how HumanX does that and see what we can find out.
That's what Robin's question was. right?
Pretty much, although that's
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
specific to like the principals.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? I had one. One of the things that was in the bottom, which was consistent in most of the things, was they don't feel that they had the right tools or right training to support them. And this was kind of concerning because the amount of time that we have for PD, the amount of plan time we give per week for in 11 hours, and the amount of resources that we have for PD. This is really concerning because we do the half days, we get the surveys back, and if we still have our staff feeling that way, this was concerning, and I wanted to know as an administration, how do you plan to address it, and what are the steps? Like, we don't want to wait a full year to figure out that our training is still not working. So what are we going to do to kind of figure that out? Because the right tools and right training with the amount of PD and the plan time we have, or I don't feel that I have enough time with my coach, or those were some of the bottom three on consistent in all schools, regardless of whether they were above 4, below 3, whatever the score was, they were still the bottom in every school. And that is concerning.
The District 73 provides the right training did go up from last year to this year. The one I'm provided with personal coaching
But
from.
they're still the bottom. That's what I
Right,
mean.
yeah,
Like,
right,
it's
right.
like-
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant it went down. So,
No, but like,
yeah.
it's still, at
Still
the
hanging out in the bottom 5.
Yeah,
bottom
still
five.
hanging in the bottom 5. And so we do surveys after PD events. We do surveys after our early release days with those things. We are also have our coaches. We have 2 coaches that go out and we get pretty good feedback on what they're providing. So we evaluate regularly through the year what seems to be working. Through HPC, we have a professional development committee that actually helps set the agendas and plan, excuse me, the agendas for the early release days, and then evaluate the feedback from staff on how they were good or bad. So that's helping us get better at what we're doing because it's providing a complete circle in the communication of how that works. So we're continually working on it that way and evaluating after we get done with a day or get done with a speaker or get done with somebody goes, group of folks who get training, we come back, we ask, was it useful or not? So we keep evaluating that piece. I'm hoping you'll see that go up into the 4 range. But we do evaluate it ongoing. We don't wait till the next HumanX. That one gets more attention than anything else on an ongoing basis. And there's quite a few opportunities for a voice from staff and personnel to come in and hear what they need. We're still working with our non-certified staff, our instructional aides and stuff, trying to dial that in to get to what they need to make sure they can service the students. That one still is a work in progress more than we are necessarily with the teachers, but we're still working on those.
Can you forward us copies of some of those surveys with the comments?
Yeah, we can look and find
A few examples.
What would we do with it as a board?
Well, when we're deciding if these 6 half days are worth it, I would like to see that. They're really hard on our families, and I understand it's easier than getting subs when we need to do this stuff, but I think anytime we're about to look at the calendar, I think we should probably consider whether those half days are as useful as they were supposed to be.
One of the other thing that was noticeable in the Humanix survey was, I mean, since the time we started, which was just 2 years ago, the number of our teachers taking the survey or the certified staff has gone up significantly, and that's a great thing because we definitely want to hear what everybody has to say. But I did feel that as comparatively, our non-certified staff is very few non-certified staff took the survey based on it's only like amongst the certified staff it's 95% or approximately that one that took the survey, but on our non-certified it's only about 20. I did the math somewhere, so about 39%. So that is pretty low. So even though it's not too bad, but it's still low compared to you see that. So I wanted to know is like, how are we trying to reach out to them to make sure that they do respond to the survey, they do take the time to
Yeah,
voice their
we
opinions?
provide them opportunities and access to it. I'll have to do a little looking into that and check the percentage of how many taking it.
Like
and
whatever
that's
we
right,
did for
right,
our teachers. I
right,
mean, I
right.
know we went
Right,
up significantly
right.
from,
Yep.
from 2015 to 2016 to now. I mean, we are going up. So whatever we did for them, we need to do the same for our ESPs,
And I
because-
believe we have. I just want to double check.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. No. Okay, because that's a little longer. I'm going to switch the discussion items up a little bit. So we do the update on the 2018-19 school year calendar.
As Lynn's coming up, it's the time of year that we're looking at calendars. We generally wait for the high schools that we feed into to finish their calendars as we try to match. We usually just follow Vernon Hills High School more than anything else, but we do try to consider the other high schools we go to. We've received those from them. Around this time, I generally have just asked the board, this is the process we're going through. We'll be starting to work with teachers to look at options for calendars. Was there any guidance from the board? Some board members in the past have provided some ideas or thoughts on what they thought would be important in the development of the calendar. So Lynn had provided us with a little memo on where we're at, where we're going. There are certain requirements, how many days we go, you have to do,
This is for the half days, right? Sorry. For the early release, yeah.
Oh, am I not on? To take the early release days. So that's how those come. They're not exactly a half day, They're just an early release day.
Sorry.
If you look at the high schools, they're taking, a lot of them have a late start. It's a little easier for the high schools to adjust their calendars. And a lot of them, I believe Vernon Hills is almost every week.
Yeah.
So we're,
Every Wednesday.
so those are just some of the backgrounds. So I did try and look for, beyond the 6 that I gave you, those were the closest to what we had this year. I did find 2 areas that we could have one that would maybe have a little more time before and after days. What I was really looking for is before we give it, before we refine it and put it out for the vote with the HEA, which we always allow them to have some input, and I also meet with the PTO before we come up with a final calendar for your approval. And I was just looking for any feedback that you would like us to address, look at, from what we currently are doing with our calendar.
Anybody have any things that Lynn should consider?
I heard some community feedback that people want us to consider start after Labor Day, but I don't know where that's going
That means
necessarily.
the high school would be on for a month.
I know.
And that
I'm,
is,
I'm just bringing the community feedback. I'm
That's
not
fine.
saying if nobody
that
wants
will
to.
go every.
If nobody wants to discuss that option, then it is
Uh,
what it is.
One of the things that I would like to consider is, other than the start dates, which the teachers would say is, as close to the high school, because parents who have kids in both, otherwise, it's a month here and it's a month on the other end too. So you don't just, if you start late, you end that much later. So your kids are off at really different times, especially if you have a high schooler. So, starting a week late and getting off a week late is, that seems to be the norm that we have followed. The only feedback I would have is, other than the early release days, we have the teacher institute days when we get off sometimes, and the parent teacher conferences. And I know this makes a scheduling nightmare, but for working parents, when they have to take time off for early release days or get off work early or work from home, and if within the same week they have a teacher institute day that they have to take off for, or a parent teacher conference on Monday or Tuesday when the kids are not in school, it just makes it harder for them. So, if you could separate them out by a certain amount, because, telling your boss at work that, oh, my kid is back home from school, so I need to go home is kind of hard for parents, especially within the same week, kind of, if you're, if you did it last Friday, you don't want to be doing it again this Thursday kind of thing. So if you could just move them away, because the teacher institute days and early release are under our control, the rest of it is kind of not. So we could just make sure that we have them separated enough so it's not a hardship on the working parents.
Is it just too long of a day for the staff if we do some full days instead of a bunch of half days? Like, is that why we don't do some full days off instead of 6 half days?
It's hard on parents.
I know, but I almost feel like the half days like
Is
harder.
there-
I don't know. It's like,
I mean, we haven't looked at it.
Is there, if we take the full day, is there a problem that it doesn't count as a day? And that's why
Yeah.
people do early
Yes.
release? If I recall, there's some
Well, we're
legal
right.
thing that if
Yeah.
you take a full day, it doesn't count as it would,
It's not a
we
student
have to
attendance
add a
day.
day on the calendar somewhere. That's why
Gotcha.
there's the early release days, if I
Okay.
recall. I believe that's the reason, and that's why you see early release days, not full days from folks.
okay.
Any other things for Lynn to consider? No? Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Hey, I will take back and create some options to present to the HEA, the PTO, and then bring it back to you in January. Typically, we bring it back to the first meeting, further discussion, and then vote by the end of January.
Thank you. Follow-up discussion on Raymond James presentation.
Raymond James was here. Abe and I have been discussing it. It's quite a big piece of information to digest. Realize that you have plenty of time to go through this. There's no recommendation to make a decision now or won't for quite some time. But Abe and I have been discussing sort of some of those options. We just wanted to bring it back while it was still somewhat fresh in your mind, give you some ideas to think about, and then it'll come back later for discussions in a few months. and later for decisions. I think you have all the way until October or something. So it's like June is when we would actually bring it for a decision. But we just wanted to share some of the thoughts or ideas that we had from that particular presentation for your consideration as you look at this. We will have Elizabeth Hennessy come back upon the request of the board. Like, this is the board meeting. We'd like her to come back and talk about some details too.
Okay, hello again. We're gonna wait for the projector to warm up briefly.
There it is. It's vaguely there.
Okay, it's coming. I'm just impatient. Okay. So I will review, kind of give you cliff notes from Elizabeth's presentation, a summary of sorts. She went through quite a bit of information. I'm going to highlight some of the key slides, just so it's fresh in your minds. We will explore this again in June for a possibility. So these are the 4 outstanding bonds. There are 2 that are callable, the 2000 A and B. They're highlighted in yellow. We reference DSEB, the Debt Services Extension Base. The green is the capacity. The blue is where we're at, projected year over year. We discussed refunding these 2 bonds, refinancing to some degree, with a total present value savings of $1.7 million by doing that. We also looked at what the remaining capacity would be if we refinanced. There would be cap space in D7 in 2028. And in 2029, every year, it would increase by CPI. It's a conservative estimate as far as the increase in CPI by 1.5%. But every year, there would be $780,000 increasing incrementally from 2028 moving forward. The cost of maximizing DSEP for the next 10 years, that is the option we recommend versus the 15 and 20. It has the least amount of interest and fees overall in comparison with the other options. The 15 and 20 would commit us long-term and wouldn't allow for this space in 2028 and moving on beyond that. The all-in cost for the 1.4 million would be $1.7 million. What can we do with these funds? Typically, it's capital improvements, HVAC, boilers, roofing projects, a major paving project, things of that sort. Another option is equipment as well. So anything that has a useful life beyond 1 year would be a qualifier. There may be some opportunity with devices, with copiers. There's options with that. So these are things we will explore. The follow-up question was, what is the impact to a median home? Option 1, it's highlighted here from 2018 moving forward. There'd be a reduction and then a slight increase in 2025. The overall impact, if you add that all up, it's zero, net zero for option 1. So in summary, by refunding the 2009 A and B bonds, there would be savings of 1.7 million present value. If we went with the 10-year option, there would be a cost over the 10 years of 1.7 million, which would create 1.4 million in DSEB bonds. We will discuss opportunities for that. There are facility needs that we're looking at. And certainly there are purchasing needs as well. So I think there's lots of opportunity for that 1.4 million. It does open DSEP capacity in 2028. And perhaps the strategy is, we go with shorter term bonds. You're minimizing the fees, you're minimizing the interest, and it would create an opportunity of $800,000 a year with that. So we can discuss this again in June of 2018 for possible refunding in October of next year. Any questions?
mean, we still have time, so
Plenty of
if between now
It
and,
really doesn't give us enough money to do any capital additions to our buildings, right?
The 20-year option would create that, but then you're kind of committing finances and you have to look at the interests. Don't know how value added that would be at $5.5 million. But certainly, we've had this ongoing summer project work, the reserve study, where we've been spending about $500,000 a year. 2028, I know it's 10 years out, but perhaps that's the strategy to meet those needs and offset those costs with DSEB.
questions? If you have any more questions, definitely email them to Nick and Abe so that they can get information to you, or, consult with Elizabeth, and then, as and when as things keep coming. We definitely will revisit this in the summer again, because the decision has to be made in October and they're recallable in December, I think, from what I remember. So we have some time to kind of do it. So we'll start revisiting it again to see if the markets and numbers have changed, or what closer to it, if the environment has changed, for us to rethink some other options or stuff that comes up. The next is Dr. Liali, the student achievement at the elementary school level. Dr. Liali, if we had the middle school questions, which was the last time's presentation, would you want them all at the end together, or like something would help? Do you want them now, or how do you want us?
Yeah, the other is that you'll get we'll email out. Presentation's been kind of revised for some additional action steps and stuff. So at the end of today, we'll email out to you tomorrow some of the revisions that were made, so you have those for your files as well.
Yeah, I had a few comments that were already made for clarification and more specificity, so I tried to change up the elementary presentation a little bit to provide that ahead of time. It's the same data, so you'll just see a different version, and hopefully it'll provide a little bit more clarity. So
Maybe then we'll wait for the presentation
until
to
the
get
end.
through. Maybe it'll answer our questions for the middle school, like if we had something we didn't understand clearly.
Sounds good. Well, I'm happy to be here tonight to present the second part of the Student Achievement and Growth presentation for our elementary schools. And with me tonight, Dr. Kiefer, principal of Town Line Elementary, Dr. Tomei, principal of our School of Dual Language, Katie Wagoner, principal of our Elementary North Building, Dr. Joe Martin, president.
Congratulations. We're impressed.
Principal of Elementary South, and Bill Fredrickson, principal of Aspen Elementary. I'm so happy they're up here with me. As I presented the middle school information, I'll probably do the bulk of it in the beginning, and then we all have some things to talk about in terms of action steps for improvement. I'm going to go through the first slides relatively quickly because we did some of them already with the middle school presentation, but if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. As always, we try to reference our strategic plan first. When we're talking about achievement and growth here at Hawthorn, we believe it means more than just an assessment. We believe it means more than park and map and all those other things. We believe in joyful learning. We believe in making sure that our children are taken care of, their whole being, and not just the academic side. So when we talk about this data, we try to always keep this in mind, that there's more to the data than just what's on these slides. Obviously, our presentation tonight is going to focus on our achievement and growth at the elementary level, K through 5. And as we presented last time, some stellar information on how our students go to the high schools, very well prepared. This is where they are prepared to go to the middle school level, and we're very proud of that performance as well. As we've talked about before, there's many different types of assessments, and they're all for different purposes. Mainly when we talk about assessment, we talk about planning for individualized growth, setting goals, looking at instruction and programming. There are a lot of assessments at K-5. There are a lot of assessments all through. The two areas in yellow have had some adjustments.
So for the MAP assessment, we now only administer that in kindergarten in the spring. So that's the first time the kindergartners see the MAP assessment. That's a baseline, and that was given or changed based on the feedback from our teachers that those fall and winter assessments just kind of weren't giving us an accurate picture. And we had enough in terms of early literacy and numeracy with the Ames Web assessment. And you'll also see that Ames Web is highlighted in yellow because we're making a transition slowly to FastBridge, or we're piloting FastBridge, and we've used it in some areas, self-contained bilingual, at Elementary North. And the reason we have tried to make the switch is because this assessment offers also progress monitoring in Spanish. And so it gives us the data that we got through Ames Web and a little bit more added value. And so we're going to be trying that in January at the School of Dual Language. And we are also piloting another assessment through FastBridge, which is a SEL screener. And you'll hear more about our new SEL programming later on in the presentation, but the screener that goes with FAST is being piloted at 5th grade at Elementary North. So lots of assessments happening. And many of them are common. Not just the ones that we design here, but also MAP and PARC. These are common assessments that we can look at in terms of data that goes across our district and sometimes across the nation and multiple states. So it gives us kind of a benchmark of how we're doing. As you know, we look at this data in all different ways. And we're going to talk about what our data is telling us, or what our data are telling us. So the PARC, as we talked about, same administration in the spring of 17 as it was in 16. It's 100% aligned with the standards that are the baseline for our units of instruction administered in English. As we talked about before, our district level data outperforming the state in reading and math. This table I introduced last time is done as a comparison from our percentage of meets and exceeds to the percentile that translates to for the state. So as you can see here, there's data from the 16 administration on the right and the 17 administration on the left. And in many cases, our schools moved up in terms of their percentile. So what this means is even though, say at Town Line, we only had 55% of students, that translates to the 84th percentile in the state, meaning that statewide, that's a pretty good number of students meeting or exceeding standards. Obviously, we're going to keep trying to improve, and you'll see later on the presentation, but it's nice to kind of know where we stand in terms of the state. So this is combined ELA and math. Table 2 is just the ELA assessments.
The PARC did change, right, from 16 to 17? A little bit.
Was that
No?
the year they changed from I can't remember now. No, I think those two are similar. The first year they did two different assessments. The second and third year they changed and combined them into one set of assessments because they were doing a mid-year performance assessment or a mid-year, I don't even remember what they called it, and then an end-of-year summative. And then for the last two administrations, they've been combined into that March window.
So then now the next one is going to change. I remember you mentioned
There's a
something
little
about
bit
a
of a
20-minute
there's a little bit of a deduction in some of the ELA units, but it's not for every grade.
Okay,
And it's about 20 minutes less
okay.
assessment.
So these two were the same.
These two are the same.
Can you send me this slide? I don't think I have it.
Yes, it'll come to you today. This is the one that was the duplicate. Yeah. And then here's the mathematics one that you had in your presentation. Also, last week, the New York Times published a new analysis of statewide achievement data on districts all across the country. And this is a chart, this is a small piece of a chart that you'll receive after this presentation too, that kind of looks at districts in our area in reference to this study that the New York Times did. So basically what they're looking at is growth in a district after 5 years and where is their added value. So you can see in the two columns that are highlighted in blue, the first column on the left indicates after 5 years, how much growth can you expect for a student in that district? And you can see for Hawthorn, it's 5.3 years of growth. So that's good. We're adding value to the time that we have with students. And at 5.3 years, we're in the 77th percentile of districts, elementary districts. So that's pretty good. And you can see all the way up to, on this particular page, Lincolnshire District 103, 5.5 years of growth for every 5 years, which puts them in the 87th percentile, all the way down to Northbrook at the bottom of the page and those 3 districts where 5 years of growth equals 5 years, right? And then where that puts them. And then, although the New York Times article didn't go into all these different demographics, I thought it would be helpful for us in terms of comparing where we are with other districts in the state to look at things like enrollment, percentage of low SES students, percentage of IEP students. And a lot of this data, most of the data was pulled right off the Illinois report card site that we'll talk about later today too. So everyone has access to this data. And the longer that we take this assessment, the more of these studies that we're going to see come out analyzing how districts are doing. And as you can see, some of the boxes are grayed because there aren't enough students to measure those things. But it's just another interesting way to kind of look at the data coming out of our statewide assessments.
And this is grade, the 5-year windows from 3rd to 8th grade, if I recall.
Yes, yes. And in the columns that indicate the percent of low SES students meeting or exceeding, the percent of IEP students, and the percent of Hispanic students meeting or exceeding, I took the 8th grade data because we would assume the longer they're with Hawthorn, the better that they would do. And I took 8th grade data for all of the districts so that you could get an idea. And obviously, this is part of a bigger, I think there's 3 pages of school districts listed on here. The ones in blue are the districts that we typically articulate with. So these are districts around us that we meet with regularly. There are other pages that would include Oak Grove. I think Oak Grove is on a different page. Libertyville is on a different page. So all of those districts are included in that. But this study just came out last week. So been working on this and know that there were some questions from the board in terms of how we compare to other districts around us. So this gives us an idea so that you can do some looking into that too. Any questions on this one? Okay. So as I showed last time, this is district level achievement gap information. As we talked about last time, we obviously have achievement gap concerns in our district where we want to accelerate growth for some of our subgroups, specifically our students coming from poverty, our Hispanic students, and our students with individualized education programs. That was the reading data, and this is the math data, the same that I indicated last presentation. And as we talked about before on the Illinois report card site, I don't know if you've had a chance to go on and look, but there's lots of different ways that you can slice and dice the data. And in terms of looking at how our district stacks up to other districts in Illinois, the place you'd want to go to is the performance scatter plots, because that would give you an opportunity to see, as we've demonstrated before, where we stand in relation to other districts that have similar demographics in terms of our subgroups. You can even look at average EAV. You can look at, there's lots of different property, language, LEP, all the different subgroups that Illinois measures for. So as a district, as we said last time, we continue to outperform the state, although that's not our goal, is to be at the state level. Our goal is to be much higher than the state, but we are proud of the fact that in all areas, most areas, we do outperform the state in reading and math. We know that we have some subgroups where we continue to struggle, and those are the largest achievement gaps that we see. As we presented last time on the middle school presentation, we wanted to highlight some of the areas where we see some really positive things happening. And you've received this already. I tried to look at cohort data first, since this is the 3rd year of administering Park, and so we can see kind of now 3rd through 5th grade in one building. And then we can also see grades over time. So, for example, at Aspen, we looked at 1 grade over time. So the 3rd grade team improving the percentage of students that they had meeting and exceeding from 2015 to 2017, from 51% to 60%. Different group of kids, but that grade level is increasing their percentage. All the way to, the School of Dual Language and Elementary North, where we're seeing a cohort improvement in ELA and math for some subgroups. The 5 essentials highlights are indicated as we did with the middle schools. There are 2 missing pieces, only because the 5 essentials does not require students to take that at the elementary level yet, but they are piloting a student voice part for 4th and 5th grade this year, so I would anticipate we'll have some student data going forward. And each of those little blocks, the darker it is, the more implemented teachers and parents report that those aspects are implemented more. So again, those are effective leaders, collaborative teachers, and involved families at the elementary level. Again, we have yet to receive any data on the Illinois Science Assessment. This will be our third administration in spring of 2018. We know that moving forward, this data is going to be including the science assessment and accountability. So it will be a measure that is looked at. We can't make any adjustments just yet because we don't have any data. But we continue to align our instruction to the standards, and we continue to look at our work and those kinds of things and articulate with other districts around us. And again, that's given to fifth graders at the elementary level. Any questions on Park before we move on to MAP? Anything you guys want to add?
President?
Okay. President? Commander? Okay. NWEA and MAP. So obviously this is our normed assessment. This is different than Park because it's not standardized, but it still has norms because hundreds of thousands of students across the United States take this assessment every year. And we've been taking it I think since 2000 or 2001. For this slide, these are the spring average writs for math and reading. So this is the math one at each building per grade level. So you can see in the box for Elementary South, the average writ in the spring was 165.9 compared to the spring norm for kindergartners based on MAP, which is at the top, 159.1. So MAP publishes norms and they redo them every 2 or 3 years. So these are 2015 norms. These are the latest norms that they have. And they have norms for fall of each grade, winter of each grade, and spring of each grade. So you can kind of compare to how students are doing across the country. So these are our norms per grade, per building. You can see in most areas we exceed the mean. And then for reading, similar. So this slide I changed up a little bit because I had some questions about the box plots and the diamonds. You have the diamonds in front of you in the presentation. This I just took and translated it to the percent of students that meet or exceed their learning targets on MAP. So as you know, when your student takes MAP in the fall, they get a projected growth number. So they're supposed to grow a certain amount based on how many students in that grade take the test. And then when they hit their RIT score, they look at the average amount of growth that a student would make starting at that RIT over the course of the year. MAP has published some articles about how typically we would expect 50 to 60% of students in a given building or district to meet or exceed their MAP targets because that target is based on an average. So half of the students don't make that and half of the students make more than that. So 50 to 60% is a good goal. And in most cases, we're there or above that. So I referenced the study or the article that was published by one of the researchers that you can certainly look at later, but I thought maybe this would be a little bit easier to look at. The box plots and diamonds have different scales, and that's based on where the mean RIT is for each of those buildings and grades, and so it looks a little bit off. So I thought this might kind of just give everyone a simpler idea of how our students are doing in terms of meeting their individual targets on MAP.
Can I ask you a question
Yes.
before you move on to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
Why, in general, does there seem to be a dip between first and second grade? Like, wouldn't that be the same group of students mostly going through, and then?
Well, these are different kids, obviously, in each grade, but we do typically see a dip in second grade, and we also see it in sixth. And what we've attributed it to in the past is that it is a different assessment. They're all MAP assessments, but there are technically 3 different assessments in the suite. There's a K1 assessment, which is called MAP for primary, and that assessment is read to students. So they wear headphones and it's read to them. The second through 5th grade assessment is not read to them. That is where they begin to start reading it on their own. And then the 6th to 8th grade assessment is a different set of content questions.
That makes sense. It's the
Yeah.
first time they're taking the test that way.
Yeah. So we aren't the only district that's seen it, but obviously.
No, it's just weird because there's other trends, but there's just like that sudden drop off.
Yep.
Okay.
Julie, did you have a question too? Okay. So this is for reading and then for math. And you'll get these obviously after the presentation. Again, I just tried to adjust to see if I could help with clarity for this presentation. Okay, and then obviously at this level, we also do an independent reading inventory, which is a Fontes and Pinnell test, which is kind of the most authentic reading assessment that we have for our students, but it also takes the longest. So this is where our teachers actually sit individually with each student and start them at the level in which they finished the year before or the last assessment, and then have the students read and answer questions individually. So the teacher at that time can do what's called a running record, and they would make indications on the sheet of what miscues the student is making, what issues they'd like to work on individually, say in a guided reading lesson. And then the Fontes and Pinnell and ANEL data, which ANEL is something that we do at the School of Dual Language in Spanish, also gives some normed information as in terms of where the student is in terms of their grade, and then what they can be working on and what their strengths are. And then finally, with Ames Web and FAST, these are again standardized assessments. They're very quick, where the IRI, the Fontes, Pinnell, and ANEL take a long time. Ames Web and FAST are minutes long. Some can be done individually and some can be done as a whole group. But basically what we're looking at is early literacy and early numeracy indicators for moving forward with their math and reading instruction. We also utilize this for tiers 2 and 3 in RTI and special education. So this is a progress monitoring tool. And then when we look at our ECRA data, as I explained last time, ECRA takes our aggregated data and tries to give us an idea of whether or not we're adding value each year. So as we try to improve, ECRA will look at the trend data for our district and determine whether or not we're getting better over time or if we're seeing the same kind of performance year over year. With the green dot, they're talking about we're getting similar performance to what we've seen in the past, which again could be a good thing or it could be not so good thing, depending on how your past performance has been. If you've been in the yellow or red and then all of a sudden you get a green, the green doesn't mean such a good thing. Blue is always a good. Blue is meaning that you're surpassing your performance in the past. So as you can see, for all of our elementary schools, we're seeing expected growth, and we have seen greens and blues for the last couple of years. So this is good information to have. Blue is when you get into like the +1 being significant. And then with our access testing, that's our English proficiency assessment. This is another state assessment that's given to our LEP students. This is not all of our second language learners, only those who are not yet proficient in English. It's given in January of every year. There's 4 components. And again, some are individual and some are groups. And this data, again, is great data to see because last year all of our dots were blue. And so even the green dots is good because we're still seeing higher than expected growth. And then those areas where we're seeing blue dots on top of that means we're accelerating growth at a faster pace for those students. So that's really, really good information. And again, here are some of those trends. We saw that higher than expected growth across the district in 2nd, 3rd, and 6th grade. And again, we had that higher growth last year, so that's really great. And as I explained last time, Access underwent a standard setting process, so they upped the standards. And then remember we talked about how they reduce the cut scores because they saw so many kids when they upped the standards, the kids weren't transitioning out of the services, and so they kind of lowered the cut score, but still we don't have as many students transitioning out of ELL services as we have in the past. So again, we're looking at our staffing and we're looking at our resources to make sure we have what we need for those students. So as we've said before, lots of things to celebrate in the data, but obviously there are some things that we need to work on. And so that's where we talk about our action steps for improvement. And that's when we get to hear from our principals too. But before I do that, I added another slide about school and district improvement planning. When we go through this process, there are some things that we try to keep in mind for all of these plans. One is that all of our initiatives need to be aligned with the strategic plan. That's a document that was, made collaboratively with our community that indicates our values. And so all of those initiatives, we want to make sure they're aligned with our community's strategic plan. We also look at long-range activities and also then short-term goals so that we can progress monitor with our data. So for example, MAP, we take 3 times a year. So we can actually look at that data and try to make some mid-course corrections. But we are looking to implement initiatives that can be long-term and that are best practices. But then we know that it takes a while sometimes for those things to become embedded. And so some of these initiatives will show up year after year on our action steps because you might begin at a level of awareness, and then the next year you might look at exploring a little bit more with the staff, and then maybe try to have some expectations after the staff development has happened, and then you're monitoring progress and looking at something being deeply embedded into the organization if it's working. So there's lots of different steps to implementing a big initiative. And so that's why we sometimes see that show up over and over again, because we don't want to be trying something and then we don't see it work right away and then shift to something else. That's not going to get us where we need to go in terms of these bigger initiatives. And obviously, all of our action steps are designed to reduce the achievement gaps that we have in our district by raising the bar for all of our kids and accelerating growth for some of those subgroups that we see are struggling. So we're going to talk about our major action steps for improvement, and Mrs. Wagner is going to begin with our first bullet.
Sure. Here. We've made large steps in the area of inclusion, as I think you've heard through previous presentations, but we've really been able to increase our district-wide practices. We've had an increase in our resources. Thank you, school board, for helping support that. But we've increased that really are allowing, district-wide, allowing to keep our students at their home schools, keep them in the least restrictive environment as much as possible to help meet their needs. And so that is one of the first steps in closing that gap, because if you can't learn if you're not in the classroom. Additionally, we've seen the benefits from co-teaching that outlast just what might be happening for that specific student. All the teachers' skills improve when you're learning from your colleague and working together. So that's something that we're seeing continually benefits and has some incidental benefit every time that you're teaching or having an opportunity to work together. You're also deepening your understanding as a professional of what you're teaching and thinking it through when you're questioning and working with a colleague. So that's something that we're really proud of making steps in for all of our students. Another piece of that is also the goal setting, though, and really personalizing that learning experience for all of our students. The implementation of goal setting for all of our children, having 2 academic goals and a personal goal where they're working with their teachers, they're choosing areas of focus, really personalizing. We have everything from I want to eat more vegetables as personal goals to I want to become a better, and more fluent reader in addition to their academic goals. So bringing in the joyful learning, helping find that choice, but really having kids vested and be a part of their own learning and goal setting and making growth and achievement. That's a strategy that we know is very effective for helping all of our learners.
Also, on the culturally responsive instructional practices, I've already been in touch with the National Equity Project and received some information back on what we can do in terms of looking and increasing awareness on equity in our district, and just looking at personal practices and insights into our professionals, into how we can try to reduce that achievement gap as well. So all of this, including some of the work that we've done with the School of Dual Language on culturally responsive instruction, is coming together to look at personalizing learning for all of our students at all levels. Dr. Kiefer?
Good evening. At Hawthorn, we believe it's absolutely imperative to have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. This means all students have equal access to a very high-quality curriculum. And the time that we work on this is during PLC time, during planning time, as well as Teacher Institute days and early release days. You mentioned early release days. This is really the only time that all departments and all grade levels can get together in the same room at the same time to really hash out the guaranteed and viable curriculum and also work on formative assessments. So we thank you for those days. All the principals are in charge of either a department or grade level working on curriculum. They're leaders of that process. This year, we're really working on creating more formative assessments, and formative assessments is really the best way to target instruction, to guide instruction, whether it's providing time for enrichment or for tier 2 or tier 3 interventions. So it's really a way for teachers to know how students are mastering skills and content areas. We also have instructional coaches. We have John Reed and Lauren Boardman working on instructional coaching. It's being done across all schools, middle school and elementary schools at various grade levels. Each coaching cycle is about 6 to 7 weeks. And Lauren and John work on anything from hour of code to technology integration to formative assessments, really honing in on their skills, how to create and analyze student data, and also looking at student work as well. Coaching is really the basic puzzle piece that supports the guaranteed and viable curriculum, making sure that it's being enacted and done in a high quality manner.
Thank you. One piece that was added was the social emotional learning. In response to some feedback that we've gotten from our teachers and administrators, we felt it was important to implement a consistent school social emotional learning program. As you know, we've gone with Second Step this year for our K through 5th grade. And we have an SEL committee that's met, I think, 3 or 4 times already this year to make sure that we are implementing that program with fidelity across the district, looking at data and assessments in terms of individual students and moving between the tiers on SEL and programming information to make sure that we are having 80% of our students well supported in our Tier 1 program for social emotional learning. So although that's on the whole child and SEL, not necessarily on the academic side, we do believe that we're going to see an academic impact from implementing the Second Step program with all of our students.
So the next thing we want to talk about is some support that we get from the Regional Office of Education. As you know, we've been building a guaranteed and viable curriculum for about 3 years now. It's a constant process. We're always looking to improve what we're doing with the students and make sure that all of our teachers have a clear understanding of what those expectations are. Like Dr. Kiefer said, we use those early release days quite a bit to develop that and to review the work that we have students completing as part of the guaranteed and viable curriculum. We have a couple of people from the Regional Office of Education who can help us out with that. One that we've been working with very closely this year is Shay McCorkle. Shay is an expert in standards as they relate to English language arts and social studies. She's been working very closely this year, reviewing as part of our peer review process with the teachers in the district, what is making sense, what we need to change, what is meeting the needs of our students, and where we need to go deeper with them. She's been heavily involved this year with particularly the early primary grades. She's been working with first grade, which is the group that I have the opportunity to work with throughout the course of the year, really making sure there's a deep understanding of what is expected from our students when we look at the standards, what that really means. Are we really hitting what we hope to hit with those students? So we're using quite a bit of our early release time to look at those standards, look at the work that the students are producing, and make our curriculum, our guaranteed and viable curriculum, even stronger for our students.
And also in response to just, what kind of feedback we get on the early release days, as Nick had shared, I work with a committee of teachers and administrators from across the district that gets together during HPC time, and actually we read through all of the feedback from every early release day as a group, and we make decisions about what needs to be changed, what can be improved for the next early release day, and so that's a group decision. And even if we haven't had a chance to meet, they immediately get all the feedback, and they can send back feedback for the next time, even if we don't get to meet in between. So that group is intimately involved in designing those pieces. But also each team that meets together on the early release day has input into their agenda with their facilitator, and they design those agendas to make sure they're using their time the most wisely and effectively.
Hi, I'm going to talk to you about full day kindergarten. Just a few short years ago, we had our entire program happen in a 2.5-hour day, and now we've been afforded the opportunity to have a full school day. One of the things that we look at when we look at our data across time is that the longer kids are at Hawthorn, the better they do. This gives us an opportunity with our youngest learners to start with a full day. So we thank you for giving us that opportunity for our 5-year-olds. As the strategic plan states, we look at the whole child. So giving us 6 hours to do that is really essential in getting our guaranteed and viable curriculum completed with our young learners. So not only do our kindergarten teachers, but our OTs and research states that the increase in touchscreen technology at a very young age has decreased fine motor skills in children entering kindergarten. So now having a 6-hour day gives us the opportunity to really dig not only into our literacy and numeracy standards, but to give children the opportunity to develop those fine motor skills, such as playing with Play-Doh, cutting with scissors, using crayons, letter formation, all those things that are essential for our young learners. Children entering kindergarten come in with such a range of skills, as we all know. We have a number of children who come in who have never picked up a pencil, don't know how to hold scissors, and don't know their letter names and sounds, to a range of children who have attended preschool since they were 2, and they can read chapter books. Giving us a 6-hour day, more time in centers, gives our teachers more time to work in small groups with children and differentiate their curriculum for this large range of needs. The kindergarten CLT is also grateful for the time of early releases. I work with the kindergarten team, and they are also looking at student work, trying to improve our expectations, create common expectations across buildings, working on pacing, discussing best practices, and now the work of the kindergarten CLT includes planning for the new building. It's so exciting and essential that we have that time to plan with the kindergarten teachers so we can make the best of a new and great opportunity. The kindergarten building is going to allow us to implement the GVC in a space that is really made for 5-year-olds. Not that that doesn't mean there won't be flexibility in that space so that it can be eventually used for any grade level, but right now in our planning purposes, we are able to plan for things that we are not able to do right now. For example, right now I have 5 sections of kindergarten. We would have to buy 5 kitchens. And when we go to our community helpers, we would have to have 5 police stations, 5 fire stations, 5 banks. In the new building, we are talking about planning a dramatic play area that goes right along with our science and social studies units, where we can set up one awesome area for dramatic play that we can rotate the children through, and all those kids can have the same experiences. The same goes for STEAM and STEM and art and music and all of those activities, which we want to make sure we're facilitating with our young students. For example, in science, our kindergartners build shelters out of recycled materials. Right now, every time the kindergarten teachers set up STEAM in their classrooms to build those shelters, they have to clean it up every day after 40 minutes, and then the next day take it all out again. Having a STEAM space will allow us to create units like that that are in our guaranteed viable curriculum right now, but will have all the materials and space that's needed, as well as area for wet play, as areas for all our different things. We've also talked about small group space in the plan, which you've seen, flexible walls, furniture that's made for our 5-year-olds, and most of all, creating an experience that's joyful for our kids.
And we are excited to see our first group of full-day kindergartners take the park assessment, I think, next year. They're going to take the first one. So talk about a long-term initiative where we're going to, see after a while, hopefully that early intervention is going to really take hold and support our kids in that assessment as well.
Good evening. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about PLCs within our district. Really, as you've heard of all the great work that is going on in the district, we needed to find a way, how do we kind of look at that information? How do we monitor the curriculum? And really that's done through our professional learning communities. PLCs, or professional learning communities, is not, it's not a program that you purchase. Really what it is a structure, a framework that we look at to really look at individual students and helping them grow. That's the ultimate goal, is to look at students growing. And so really PLC may be a newer term in our district, but really it really isn't a new concept. We have been working as a PLC for many, many years. And really our PLCs are what drive our curriculum and the work that we do for students. There are four critical questions that we ask ourselves when we talk about a PLC or working within a PLC community. And the first question is, what do we want our students to know and do? That's such an important question. And really the response to that is our GVC, is our curriculum. And then the next question that we ask ourselves is, how do we know if students are learning what we intended them to learn? And the response to that is that speaks to the assessments. That those could be classroom-based assessments, those can be common formative assessments, or even the common summative assessments that we take throughout the year that we talked about today a little bit. The third question that we ask is, what do we do when students do not understand a concept or a skill that has been taught? And the way we respond to that is through interventions and supports. And so we really look at differentiating the instruction, finding the time, creating schedules to be able to provide individualized support for students that need additional support in a particular skill. And then the last question is, well, what if our students already know the curriculum that is being taught? Well, what we do there is we accelerate or we enrich the students. And so within this framework, we catch all students regardless of where they're at, whether they're on level, below level, or above, because the goal is to really meet each individual child's needs.
Thank you. And in terms of a PLC, this is a great one. Our elementary principal group is a great group that's always kind of talking and sharing ideas of what's working and how we can get better in terms of grades K through 5. So what questions do you have for us?
I'll start. So it's my understanding about that a guaranteed viable curriculum is supposed to guard against achievement gaps. And based on the data, our achievement gaps are increasing.
In some areas, yes.
Yes, and so, well, right. But they're still going up, and they're not decreasing. So how do we know what we're doing is working?
So what we're working on now is the units have been developed and our CLTs continue to meet. And what we're talking about is an administrative team is what does the implementation look like? So you can have lots of great documents and you can have your outcomes and you can have your assessments aligned and out there. And if we're not looking at what's actually happening in each classroom and what the instruction looks like and whether or not it's responsive to every student's needs, and that's where there might be a gap. When we talk about walkthroughs, when we talk about what can we look for as evidence that the guaranteed viable curriculum is being implemented and is in practice, that's what we've been talking about as a team. So it's not just those outcomes, but there's leading indicators that can help us to understand at what level we're implementing that guaranteed viable curriculum to. So we can talk about objectives being up on the board. We can talk about those essential questions and enduring understandings being posted. We can talk about talking with students. What are we learning today? And why do you think you're learning this? And how do you know that you'll know it? So those kinds of questions being asked to students, do they really understand where they are in terms of the curriculum? Our administrators talk about this with all of their teachers when they do observation cycles. The GVC is part of it. The teachers reference those units and the lessons that they're in. But obviously there are some pieces in there that we need to keep shoring up because you're right, that those outcomes need to be there for all students. Go ahead.
I would just add that this year as well, through the CLT process, we're bringing the student work to the table. So every grade level now that they're implementing, they're bringing the assessments and really kind of looking to see how did this specifically meet the students' needs? Was it on target and missing them? Was it too easy? Was it too hard? How do we need to refine that? So that process of analyzing student work that's really getting embedded this year at that district level will help us continually refine our units to make sure that we are meeting all the needs.
Well, the other piece of that too is when you bring that student work in, you get examples of students in all of those different categories, and where those subgroups where we're experiencing some of those achievement gaps, we can look at that student work for for particular students in those achievement gaps and say, well, look at Elementary North, they were able to address that group of students where we're seeing a larger achievement gap, and those students were more successful. What was it that the teachers at that building were doing that's different than maybe we were doing at Aspen? And that's why those common times in that professional learning community and that early release time is so important, because we're sitting there looking at the work and making some decisions about how we can approach those different subgroups of students.
Just to piggyback on that, I was going to say the exact same thing. The early release time is the only time that we can have teachers from every single building looking at the exact same formative assessment, summative assessment, and look at the differences of what is going on in the different buildings. And it gives us that opportunity to tweak and refine our GVC all the time and make changes and learn from each other. So that is essential time for us.
And just one more thing I thought of, on the agenda tonight, we're going to start our EMFP discussions. And should we decide to put another referendum question on the ballot, we have to be prepared for difficult questions. And the one question that I could potentially see being asked is, why should the community invest in a school district where achievement gaps are increasing? What's going on? So how do we answer that question?
I think there's no one right answer to that question. I mean, investing in our students is always a good investment, I would think. As you know, I think we all know at these two tables, our principals are dealing with some space constraints, programming that's been displaced, teachers that are teaching in smaller spaces than they're accustomed to, more kids in rooms. We have, in some cases, bigger class sizes and things than we would think are maybe optimal. But what we're talking about in terms of the achievement gap in our district is real, and we're trying to address it in many different ways. And like I talked about with those initiatives, those long-term initiatives, there are some things that are going to take a while for us to see gains. And some of it is going to be teachers looking individually at, their own pedagogy, at their own instruction, at their own response to different students and students in different cultural backgrounds. And us as a board and administrative team, like we heard at our session at III, really committing to making sure that we invest in reducing those achievement gaps and making sure that we give the attention to the subgroups that need the attention in lots of different ways. An investment can look like a lot of different things. I mean, buildings are one thing, staffing is another thing, resources are another thing, time is another thing. So we look at resources in all different ways in this district, and we do have a lot. We have a lot of resources, and so when we look at capitalizing on those opportunities, that's why we continue to look at the feedback from our teachers, continue to look at our assessment data, continue to utilize the expertise up here in our administrative team. How can we keep this moving along and keep seeing improvements? But yes, that is a good question.
And just one more thing I'd like to add on one of the slides that was added. I think the last bullet points said designed to reduce the achievement gaps by raising the bar for all and accelerating growth for some of the subgroups. I was excited to see that because, as we know, Illinois isn't exactly high on the list of states, for education.
Mm-hmm.
So when we compare ourselves to, throughout Illinois, the bar's kind of low. So I'd really like to see, I was excited to see that we're
well, and I would say the data
raising
from
it.
the New York Times article is encouraging too. In the 77th percentile of districts across the country is pretty good.
Yeah.
When we look at what we offer here also on top of the academics, and we look at the extracurriculars, we look at the music program, we look at opportunities to learn language, there is a lot here in this community that people move to the community for those opportunities. And yes, we will continue to work diligently to make sure that we're reducing those gaps. And we're also making sure that all of our students we're raising the bar for all of our kids.
I have to say that in our COTs, when we work on our guaranteed viable curriculum, I'm in charge of third grade. And I know the other principals say this as well too. Our number one discussion and question is, how can we increase rigor and how can we increase expectations for all students? That's probably the driving force behind making sure the curriculum is of high quality.
Great. Thank you.
I want to add something here to piggyback off Wes's question of, the community asking.
Which
have
one?
the achievement slide you can throw.
The math or reading achievement, the part one. The reason I wanted to just address this is more towards the community. I mean, we have an achievement gap and we have to address it. And we've been investing in it as a board and as our administration and our teachers. But one thing I wanted to point out from the park data that we do have, I mean, our achievement gap does look big, and this is for the community. But if you look at the actual graphs, once Lisa can will pull them up because
Thank you. Hang
is
on. All I need was visual. Thank you.
yes, this one. So if you look at the lower, if you look at our district, if you look at even the lower bar graphs where it is for the low income or the Hispanic is pretty much the same, or the IEP students, our scores are higher than the state average. Even though we don't want to compare ourselves to the state right now, this is what we can go with. And I'm not saying that we don't have to work better or to make ourselves, but this is more for the community for asking, should we invest in the schools? Our lower scores are better, but our higher scores are very high. So that gap looks bigger at 41 because the differential is much higher. So when you go to the Illinois report card, and if you want to pull up just your non-low income population or your non-Hispanic, white, or Asian population, and you look at their scores as compare them to the other districts or other schools in the state, or even the highest schools that you can think of in the state, those are really, really high. And that leads to a really large differential in the achievement gap. Not that we don't have to raise the bar up for everybody, but that is one of the reasons why the gap or those numbers look big when you look at them on the screen per se. So this was more for the community to know that it's not all bad. We are doing good.
Yeah, I mean, when these are the scatter plots. I was talking about the performance scatter plots where you can see us, and this is again only compared to Illinois. So, but you can disaggregate by lots of different subgroups and lots of different types of information if you want to take a look at how we're doing as compared to other districts in Illinois and even around us. So,
Lisa, if you put up that slide that has the cohort data, the one thing I just wanted to point out with the achievement gap is on this slide right here, you can see that we have some subgroups, we have some pockets of where we're really making some big improvement. And as an elementary PLC, we meet, and that's exactly the kind of data we're looking at is what is that team that was able to bring the SES subgroup up doing. So it's something that we discuss all the time, and you can see there are pieces of it that are actually really growing and doing quite well. And so that's what we've been looking at as an administrative team to try to help us across the district.
I would just add, well, one additional thing that we're doing, especially with SES students or our schools that receive Title I funds, is that we looked at our approach differently too, related to how do we involve our parent community, because we found that was a little bit of a missing piece for us. And so the way we've structured our evenings for our Title I parent meetings is what we really involve them in the educational process. We take them through actual assessments and data that their child takes, helping them understand what the data means and how they can best support them at home. Now, that's been a pretty significant change for how we've involved parents within the educational process.
So I don't want to harp on the achievement gap for too long because I hear what everybody's saying and I agree with you, Lisa. There's like 1,001 ways to slice the data, right? And you could keep looking at it from a different angle. But what I find concerning about it is, yes, to Sonali's point, if you are doing really well, and of course we can see that some areas are growing despite the overall scores. If you're doing really well, then of course it's sort of hard to keep growing and growing and growing. But what the concerning part for me is, regardless of the national data, the important thing for our students is what's going on right here, not what's going on in Mundelein or Libertyville or New York or anywhere else. And what's important for them is if it was truly just a matter of we're already doing really well, so it's hard to then we would see the same achievement gap over and over and over again. Problem is this achievement gap is growing. So it's not narrowing, which would be ideal. It's not even staying steady, which would be like, but it's growing. And so that's just in comparison to ourselves, not anything else. So that's what I find concerning because I sit there and go, I'm looking at the action steps for improvement from last year, from this year. There's been some minor changes, but a lot of them are very much the same. And I'm sitting here going like, if we're going to do the same things, are we going to expect different results? So of course, it's good that we're adding in some culturally responsive instructional practices. And, you know, I do see some new stuff on here. And I agree, we can't keep changing our approach or you'll never be able to see the long-term benefit of any one approach. But how much can we count on one particular thing if that gap isn't closing? So I look at things like the inclusionary model. Like is this the first full year we're doing this or the second year? I can't even remember now. But you look at something like that and you look at our kids with IEPs and you go, okay, is that really working? Like if we're seeing this gap growing, is that really working? Is co-teaching really working? These things that are sort of meant to target that kind of stuff, I think we'll have to watch over the next year or so. If that gap keeps getting bigger, then we go, maybe that's not a good way to structure our classroom, or maybe it's not a good way to structure our, curriculum. I don't know. But I just want to sit here and go, I just want to sit here and know that the action steps that are being added or ones that are being removed are being done with some sort of evidence that in the end, this is what's going to pay off.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I'm just going to add as well, in terms of, the inclusionary model, there's a range of things that, we're doing in a range of ways you would see it show up.
Mm-hmm.
So within the park piece of things, yes, that's still existing, but there's been other indicators that we have in terms of individual growth for students, the whole child we talk about, that social, the belonging, a lot of those. Additionally, something we've gotten better at as a district has been keeping our students that have more significant disabilities than we've seen previously. So there's a big range, I think, of things that we're doing to kind of, make sure that we're including all of our students and that they all belong in our classrooms. But I agree.
And I would encourage us to remember that the achievement gap data is only coming from Park. So there are lots of assessments that we do, and there are a lot of assessments that a lot of districts do. And the only one that we get an analysis on that's any kind of large scale like that in terms of the achievement gap is Park. And so that's the only thing that I would say as a thing to be careful of, is that usually when you're looking for trends, you're looking to triangulate the data. And this is one piece that we get, that large scale study of achievement gap data. It certainly is concerning. It's certainly something that we're trying to address. The formative assessment piece is very big because as Park is the main standardized or standards-based assessment that we have, what we want to do is work backwards from that Park assessment and see formative assessments on the standards and the curriculum that's being presented in each classroom. The MAP doesn't necessarily do that. As we talked about last time, it's an adaptive test. So it doesn't necessarily go into what a student has been exposed to in their classroom, but it does show transfer and growth over time. Ames Web is looking at individual measures of early literacy. Fontes and Pinellen and Neal give us a different view of a student as a reader. When you're looking at Park, you're looking at a timed assessment as opposed to something that isn't timed, like an IRI, and the teacher can really dig into what a student is learning. We talk about a lot of different factors, and our second language learners and sometimes students with special learning needs need to slow down and need to approach work in a slower, more careful way, need to look at different things. And so when you look at a timed assessment, we have to look at that too. Obviously, there are students with accommodations, and that's there to support those students too, but not all students have that. So again, just as a cautionary note, that's the one piece that we have that achievement gap data on, but that's why we do a lot of other assessments to make sure that we're looking at it from all different angles. But obviously, there are a lot of things to be considered here so that we can reduce that gap.
And we evaluate, look at what we're implementing, try to evaluate, see there's a need, we tweak, and data, and continue. And without jumping from thing to thing to thing, giving some things a period of time to to play out. But we do evaluate, back to your question, we do evaluate that. And these items really are researched based that tell you, here are some things that really impact students. We're doing a lot of things that would tell you by research should get some significant changes. Now the question is, when we see those, or what might be an issue in the implementation that would get that to where we need to go. And that's the work we're doing right now.
The other piece that it would be we shouldn't ignore is the articulation with other districts around us. We are not, struggling in this alone. Our principals articulate with other principals. Our middle schools articulate with other middle schools. We're looking at this with our high school. We're looking at it with other sender districts to our high schools. And we're discussing books and we're talking about articles, and we meet together regularly to discuss how can we make this happen for our students here. And you're right, it is about the students in Vernon Hills, and that's typically what we're looking at. But as a community, many times you're looking to compare. How are your schools doing compared with other schools? So you have to kind of look at both sides of things. But for us as a district, we're looking at our own data, and we're looking at our data over time.
I wanted to ask a question also about the second step. As much as I love that program on its face, I don't know how much I love the implementation, to be honest. I'm sure they're doing stuff in the classroom that I'm not seeing. I think I probably hear about it more for my second grader just because she's your typical girl who likes to come home and tell you like every corner of her day. But I'm seeing a lot of stuff come home, and I'm asking other parents, so I know it's not just my kid's teacher or my kid's school, but there's like homework, so to speak, that comes home from second step, these sort of activities that you can do interactively with your family. There's no requirement that they be signed. There's no requirement they be returned. There's no requirement that they don't be used for kindling. So not that we can keep putting so many demands on people. I know there's already demands on everybody's time in a million different directions. But I think most of these are going in the garbage, or else you're getting a self-selected group that is going to do them, but it was probably people that were already interested in boosting their kids' social emotional learning anyway. So what can be done with that? And if it's an implementation problem, would this have been better tackled by having somebody come in and train the teachers on how to deliver this rather than doing the online instructional tutorial that they went through?
We can certainly look at it. We have a subgroup of our SEL committee that's looking at the implementation of Second Step program across the district. We're implementing a survey this month with all teachers on how it's going and what they see as the strengths and weaknesses. Certainly we'll bring that to the committee, and we can take a look at whether or not we need to be more tight on the implementation of the homework processes. I've seen those come home too. So yeah, I mean, it is sort of like, where is your child at, and do you want to discuss it? That's kind of where it is. But we can take a look at that too. And as far as additional training, I would need to take a look at what additional training is offered on top of the suggested kind of webinar and get started thing. We usually do, after we've implemented for a while, bring in somebody for question and answer on a big adoption like that, so we can take a look at that too.
Okay. My other question, because Nick just jogged my thoughts here. When you said, of course, we're looking at things that we implement, and then down the road, how does that show in the results? What about looking at the things we've taken away and how that's affecting it? So it's been several years now. We took away teacher's aid at the elementary level. The classrooms with co-teachers might be operating a little bit more like they have a teacher's aid, but it's really not in every classroom. Things like RTI, if I remember correctly, when my older children went through, there was RTI offered for reading and math. Now I believe it's just offered for reading. And if it's not, then, I don't know what's going on, but there's a lot of feedback, not just at my children's buildings, but a lot of feedback that it's very, very tough to get kids those RTI services. The teachers feel like they really have to battle because there's limited resources and people's schedules get full, and that it really has to be serious before somebody gets that help. And I'm wondering, are we missing a big chunk of kids where we could be addressing these problems earlier because we don't have enough RTI, and it's waiting until things fall apart and they need an IEP and stuff like that? So what about those types of things where
We don't have specific math interventionists in any of the elementary buildings. We do have them at middle schools, math interventionists and reading interventionists, but we do have flexibility in our enrichment teacher schedule. And we do have some reading specialists who are used for math interventions as well. To my knowledge, given the data and the cut scores that we have at each of our buildings, the students who are qualifying for those services that need the Tier 3 support are getting it when they need it. But typically, reading is given the Tier 3 support first, is giving that first priority. And then math is done in the classroom as needed, because we've integrated the acceleration block, the 20-minute math acceleration block and the 40-minute acceleration block for reading. But we can certainly take a look at those numbers and see if there are students who aren't getting what they need.
I don't know. I'm not an educator. I just think it's really hard to meet 25 different needs all in one setting, especially if there's a handful of kids that are really functioning much lower than the other students. So I just sit there and go, math intervention in middle school is great, but they're 6 years prior to middle school. So all my questions.
Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I've got comment on the action steps for improvement. So looking at what we're going to do going forward. I look at that list. You can bring it up.
Sorry, thanks.
It's slightly disappointed in the fact that 5 out of those 8 are things we were already doing. So it's really not new. So you kind of talked about that, the guaranteed viable curriculum, started that about 3 years ago. Full day kindergarten, we're on our 3rd year. We've heard about professional learning communities for as long as I've been here. Early release
That's a long
days.
time.
Yeah, I know. That's why I didn't put a date on that. Early release days, that's been going on for a while. So I was hoping to see a little bit more as to what are we doing differently? What are we doing more? You talked about some of that by getting a little more detail into what are you focusing on, some of these things that have already been doing. So it's more of a comment, we're going to do something different. We're going to do something new. I'd like to see a little bit more of that data or more of that information to say, yeah, for guaranteed viable curriculum, you talked about looking at implementation practice. That might be something that you're focusing on. But that wasn't presented until Wes or Robin asked about it. So it's just for me, and I think for the board to know, to get a good feeling is where are we going and what are we going to do new and different to get better.
We'll put something together for you. Because some of those, I know that we talked about working with the ROE. Each year we can list the ROE, but what we're doing with the ROE is different each year to meet a certain need that we've identified. So we'll put something together and send it out to you. It's the same with the PLC work. It's transitioned, as we get more expertise in using the data and looking at student work, that's changed then into, right now, really looking at those formative and summative assessments and making sure that common is common. We're expecting everybody in 3rd grade to take this common assessment. It hasn't been adjusted in one school or the other. The other piece that we're really working on is when we're looking at common assessments, we're also then looking at common expectations. And we're fighting that internally to make sure that every student, our expectation for each student is at a high level, that we don't internally think, well, this will be all right for this child. It'll be all right for this child. So we're going through those and making sure how. But we'll send you some more detail on it.
I would say something that we continue to work on, that we've worked on for a long time too, is sort of a less is more approach with teachers too. I'm sure that many of you who have talked to your own teachers have heard that teachers, it is difficult to meet the needs of all the students in your classroom, to differentiate for 25 different students every year, to get to know them, to understand what their needs are, what their strengths are, and to build lessons that are based on those students' strengths and not just their deficiencies. And I would say that the workload entailed with just that, getting to know one's own classroom and making sure that they are responding to their individual needs is quite a task every year. And so when we talk about action steps for improvement, getting better at that every year, at understanding students, at understanding data that we see come out of all these different assessments, at looking at the data coming out of Park now third year in a row, so looking at trends and trying to address trends. 1 or 2 years of data doesn't give you a lot to work with. But now that we have 3 years of data and we have some comparative information on other districts, we can hone those skills a little bit better, and we can look at formative assessments a little bit deeper. We did an early release day session with all of our teachers. I think it was 2 sessions ago, where all of our teachers looked at a flow chart for looking at formative assessments. And it was it filled an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper in terms of decision making when you are giving a student a formative assessment, and listening to their thinking and responding to student thinking and engaging them in that process. It's not new because it's formative assessment, but we're trying to get down to the skill of actually using the assessment and listening to the students' thinking to respond to that before they would need to go to an RTI situation. So I understand what your concern is, and I do. I would say our teachers are working very, very hard at getting to know their students every year, and that our principals can attest to the fact that just supporting our students in that, or our teachers in that venture, and the various professional development opportunities coming along with personalized learning and adding technology, which we didn't even talk about really. There was a lot of tech added to the elementary schools this year because of the Chromebook initiative, as we talked about 2 weeks ago. At the middle schools, our teachers are consistently looking for ways to improve their practice. And so continuous improvement through the PLC process is the thing that drives improvement. And it's been shown through districts here, where it was born at Stevenson High School, and then across the country at districts who come from everywhere and even around the world to learn that process, because there isn't much more to do outside of that than just looking at the students who are in front of you, getting to know them, knowing where they are in terms of the expectations that you have for them as a district, and then adjusting your instruction to get there. But obviously, as simple as that sounds, it is one of the most difficult jobs in the world. And so our principals, our assistant principals who are here also, our coordinators, and our teachers in particular, work very hard every day on making sure that this happens for all of our students. And we are committed as a district to make sure that we continue that improvement in lots of different ways. So we will get more specific on those little things that we're doing to tweak that process. But I would say that we have a very, very dedicated and hardworking staff that's been trying to improve on those best practices that we've put in place for a long time at Hawthorn.
And I don't want to sound all doom and gloom. I really don't. I mean, obviously, I have my own 3 children in this district, and they wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in what we were doing, and didn't believe that we had the best staff possible to, meet the needs. So as a board member, it's my job to make sure we're moving forward and continuously improving and growing. But I do not want to sound all doom and gloom. And if anybody saw the recent article, maybe a month ago, teachers make more decisions in one day than brain surgeons do. So if you wonder why they're exhausted and you wonder why they need their breaks, that's the reason. So I do appreciate everything that's being done, and we'll keep moving
We
forward.
had a trainer one time who came in and said, our patients are awake and not always willing. That's the difference. So
You just need
definitely
anesthesia.
comparative.
That's really good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
The next item on the agenda is the NASB Annual Conference. We had talked about it last time. You had some emails forwarded to you if you had a chance to look at it. This year's, the conference is April 5th through 7th. I keep forgetting. In San Antonio, Texas. And the theme for this year, it highlights inspirational individuals from different walks of life who made contributions to society. They have not released their specific schedule as yet, but their 3 keynote speakers are Terry Bradshaw, Ann Compton, and Julian Castro. So most of the hotels are already sold out. Looking at the fees, as well as the registration fees, the flights, and the per DEM or something, it would come to about $1,500 or so per board member, 1,500 plus. The question was, from the III, it was kind of suggested that this is a good conference to attend, to look at issues at the national level, see what's going on. We weren't planning on sending everybody. It would be 1 or 2 board members, and maybe send them every other year. If we don't want to do it this year, we can talk about it next year, bring it up again. This year it's in San Antonio, next year it's in Philadelphia, the year after that is in our backyard. So it's in Chicago. So any thoughts, any ideas, any comments?
So at that price per board member, that's not the Four Seasons San Antonio. No.
It's like, but right now you're
I'm just
not
kidding.
getting Motel 6
I'm
either.
kidding.
Everything is sold
Teasing
out.
The rent-a-car you'll be sleeping in is very comfortable.
Right, totally.
And it's one of those little bitty ones.
Maybe you've heard of a smart car.
Yeah.
Insurance will let you stay at the hospital. My personal thought, I'll go if people need a representative to go. I don't find this to be so important, so it's not really a matter of the money for me. I looked at the agenda of what's being offered. I didn't find things that I found to be so super relevant to what we have going on right now. And if we didn't have a ton on our plate, I would say, ooh, let's go and hear what we can be inspired by. But I feel like we have a ton on our plate that's going to require a lot of extra time from us as board members outside of the usual commitments. So I would go if somebody said this was important to the board as a whole. But I think there's, I don't know. I don't think it's like that big of a priority. Although I hear San Antonio is pretty awesome.
It's beautiful.
It's great. Anybody else saying?
I kind of just feel the same way Robin does.
Okay. Anybody else want venture to volunteer an opinion?
I have 2 comments.
Yes.
The first is, we're fortunate to have the Illinois Association of School Boards, the III conference, which is convenient. It's downtown. I don't see anything of extra value in the national conference that makes it worth, even if you don't think $1,500 is a lot of money, that makes it worth sending a board member that they're going to learn so much and bring back of value. And the second comment is, I have a problem sending especially board members to a national conference when we're going to be looking at spending $12 million of district money on a kindergarten center. We're looking at extending bonds out further to capture more money, and we're looking at a potential referendum of tens of millions of dollars. So that's just my opinion.
Anybody else venture to say anything?
We can look at the Chicago one, the local one in 3 years.
I agree.
Yeah.
Me too.
I think that might be something.
I think we could look at it next year too and see if there's something on the agenda or the topics that seem more relevant or we think we can learn something. It'll again come up in a year's time. We can look at it at that point and see if it seems like we should attend. We could do it as it takes 10 minutes to talk about it, 10 minutes to
Right.
see what is there, and we can visit it every
Before
year.
the rooms are all booked.
Before the room's hauled.
So
Or-
until next year.
So, okay, so that's that for next year. So the next item, which is the one for discussion, is the EFMP. Everybody had the information. For the sake of making it more structured, one of the things was, and because this is going to be an ongoing discussion for a little bit of time, I will be cutting people off after a certain time limit. We were going to do it in 2 formats. One was the needs and the plans per se, and then one was the community outreach. Because when we get mixed up, just to keep it separate, clear, and so everybody's thoughts on each of the topics are heard and said and talked about. We also have Jason here. So if, especially for the new board members, if you had questions, or not even the new, all of us, if you have any concerns, questions, anything specific to the plans or anything along with the community outreach too, because he has the experience of helping other districts, he definitely has his expertise. He won't be here every time, so today, let's try to be concise, precise in getting his opinion or his expertise on some of the things that we need, especially with the architectural plans, or how he has helped other communities in their outreach towards things. So based on that, last time we had come to a conclusion or a consensus of sorts that we are full. We have space needs. All our buildings have space needs. From the adjustments, every building has made an adjustment and are full. The kindergarten center, which would be ready in, as far as right now, if we assume that it's going to go on track and we're going to go out for it, moving all the kindergarten students except for dual language students was freeing up space in each of the elementary buildings, and which was 5 in Elementary South, 3 in Aspen, 3 in Town Line, 4 in Elementary North. Those were the would be the rooms that would get opened up after the kindergarten students moved out. Nick had forwarded a memo about most of the backfill that would happen, because right now in Elementary North, once the kids move out, that is where the current definite development of Cuneo, that's where the students are boundary to go into. So those many students itself will fill up most of the space in Elementary North, along with the projected growth that is there. Townline has enrichment in Townline is on stage, and a lot of the teachers are meeting in the rooms of library, and services are offered there. So those rooms, the 3 rooms out there, are going to get backfilled right away without even additional students. We haven't even counted for those students. Aspen, they are using, their offices are converted into workrooms. Their art and music is in the general education classrooms. Their band and orchestra lessons are on stage next to the cafeteria. So there's enough backfill there. Plus, they are slotted to take in the developments that might go in of Woodland Chase and Melody farms that would go. Elementary South, I don't think I have to tell you the adjustments they have made. They have portables outside. So anything and everything, they are filled to the capacity. So any space that they have is completely backfilled. And this is not even talking about the growth that would come in for the next of our students. And this is not just students, this is also programming needs. So that was where we were. The middle schools do not get any relief or any reprieve from there. So based on that, if we want to start, I'm going to start with, it's 8:55. So let's start with first of all, we'll start, we looked at both the option A and option B. You had the architectural graphs, architectural drawings for those that were given to you. So I'm going to start with the newer board members to see what they think, what their priorities are. If they have any questions that they would like Jason to answer for them, we'll go around the table. This is not a discussion. This is just us stating and getting our questions answered, heard, and then we'll come back to discussion. This is the first thing. If your idea has already been said, you can say, I agree with Matt, and move on. Because
no one agrees with me.
No, we are all agreeing with you right now. So just for saving time. So Matt,
Oh, first.
you're a new one. Last time I put Julie first, so you get to go first.
Okay. Honestly, I looked at option A and I kind of scrapped it.
Okay.
I'm struggling right now. STEM centers. That's my. Take that out, and it can kind of diminish the cost.
When you say STEM centers, do you mean the
Yeah, and
the
it's
standalones?
The standalone.
Those were
no.
Well, it's
'cause
on both
option B
plans.
some of them were added in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that was just for the community also, I'd like to say, in the option B, initially there were 2 standalone STEM centers. And when the board decided what they wanted to do, the modification that the board made at that time when we went to referendum was that there wouldn't be a standalone facility and it would be a classroom in each of the buildings. Like it would be like a library or a music room. So it was just a classroom you can call it a maker space, a STEM space, a STEM center, whatever, but it was attached. It wasn't a standalone facility as was initially presented by the core team and our architects. So that was the option. So when you say STEM center, if you could specify as standalone or within a building, that would help me to just keep track of what
I'm going to
they-
just start over. Here's my my thought process when I was writing all these numbers down was more of the overall cost and what the community would stomach, and that's where I kind of just started driving at, and then how much we could pull out of that amount. And I was kind of around 25 million. That was amount for the community.
That's what you
And that's kind of where I started just trying to pulling stuff out. And the STEM centers, unfortunately, were like one of the first things got tossed because they're the biggest chunk out of there. That's not to say I'm right on that at all. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out like classrooms because that seems to be the push of what we need. Gyms and the multi-purpose rooms and all that. So I was just,
You believe 25 million is a target?
I think it's a stomachable
okay.
amount. That's my priority, was more of the cost and then just working myself backwards.
Okay.
That's how I went at it.
No, that's
Anyone else
fine.
went
Just-
that way.
Did we get a sense from the survey that the amount was too much?
I didn't.
I don't really said, but
So the only reason I'm asking that is like, do we go about this in terms of, here's what we think community will stomach based on any feedback? I didn't kind of get that sense that it was either, it wasn't like, no, this is too much, I would have done something less. It was just, no, don't want it all. Or yes, I want it. Or do we kind of go build it up the other way of saying, here's what we need, what does it add up to?
Mm-hmm.
And then see if that's within that stomach range.
I was going the minimalist approach.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Go
You know,
ahead.
and then
I mean,
go back
well,
the other way and come to a middle ground.
Just want to see what kind of
somewhere.
sense
Yeah,
numbers
I
had in
agree.
terms of what the community was thinking about in terms of dollars. If we're just looking at the dollars, I didn't think 57, 42, 38 made a difference.
Well, and the problem, in my opinion, of going with what will be palatable or whatever the community can stomach is that if it's not really solving our issues and then 3 years from now we say, oops, we need more, that's going to be another issue.
That's where I was at.
And that's
STEM
where we
things-
went with the amount that we did the first time
Because we
was
didn't
to
want it to
address
go back,
exactly that,
right.
that issues. We did not want to come back for a second time.
I
We said,
understand.
here's the master plan,
Within
which
our
includes
terms.
everything.
next
Go for
term,
it all.
people can do that.
And that's where I was stuck because I thought the STEM was one of those one items on the survey where people
Mm-hmm.
were kind of like, or really for it. And
Yeah, but the
That's-
STEM
It was
doesn't.
mixed.
Yeah.
The STEM doesn't address immediate space anyway, so that
Right.
if we are going to cut anywhere, I mean, that could be the first thing to go, obviously.
Okay, Matt,
I'm done.
you're done? Wes,
Okay.
I'll go Wes before you. Matt, just to clarify, when you said, the thing is, you didn't like the option A, 25 million was what you thought the community could stomach, and we can have that discussion later.
Yeah.
You were struggling with the STEM center as standalone or even within the schools. Could you just,
Within the school, I'm just looking at all the
Okay.
option B stuff. Matter if it was standalone or,
okay, even within, okay.
yeah.
Sorry, Wes, go ahead. Your thoughts. Do you have questions for Jason? Sorry.
I do not.
I just want to make sure that, we have him here, so.
He looks lonely.
Sorry, now you can go.
Okay. I want to make sure that we've captured all the needs from the building administrators. I know things change. So before moving forward, I want to make sure that we have every need, want that they would like to see for their building. I know that, I guess in a perfect world, we'd be able to afford everything. But I think that will help us make sure that we're capturing what we really need. It's also difficult for me to, look at this when knowing what I heard at the AAA conference in the 2 sessions with the successful referendum. The one thing that really struck me for the Champaign-Urbana one is that all of the planning meetings were open to the public, so the community knew what was going on. And I think a lot of feedback that I received before the referendum in talking to people, and I have no doubt that every option was addressed. But because the meetings were not open, the community could not attend, they didn't know for sure if every possible solution was addressed. So I think moving forward, somehow we as a board need to figure out how we can address that so that the community knows what's going on, what our immediate needs are. So that's the first important thing moving forward. The addressing the needs at Middle North, I think would be number one.
Anything else?
Elementary South. And then, I mean, all of our buildings have needs.
No, definitely.
So, but those were the two buildings that I think have the most pressing. Elementary North. They're running out of space at Town Line.
No, all buildings have needs. This was just like, what about the plan you liked, you didn't like, what you wanted to take out, what you thought was more pressing needed to be addressed, and that's the thing. So this was more, and if you have any questions for Jason to help you understand, because, he was through every single, so if you have any questions, this is for the public to come and see. This is for them to view at their time. So if there's any questions you have to him regarding any of the plans, any of the options, anything that has been there on that. Julie?
We all know the middle schools right now are probably our greatest need, and then elementary south. Just looking at option B, if we were gonna keep the same thing, the STEM centers obviously are probably the way to go, but I'm kind of along with Wes on the community involvement. And I don't think a November timeline is really a good timeline. We have so much going on right now between the kindergarten center, teachers' contracts. I think it's gonna be hard to get the community support to do anything at this time. So I don't know if it's even worth, at this specific moment, sitting down or waiting till we're further along with other projects we currently have. Sorry, Jason, no questions.
Robin?
Okay, so going at this two different directions. One direction is assuming everything goes through with the kindergarten center and it opens on time and all that good stuff. Then I don't have a specific dollar amount in my head because I didn't really take the survey feedback and feel like the community gave us their idea of what a good dollar amount would have been. But it did definitely stand out to me that STEM centers, maker spaces, whatever, was not the priority of the community. And I think that's important to take into account. So I would probably also discard that, start addressing the middle school, because presumably at this point, the kindergarten center has freed up some space at the elementary level. I think the other side of the coin, though, for me is, I don't know how to say this the right way. I don't know that I'm 100% sure that this kindergarten center can go through. I think we've asked numerous times for an illustration of how we're going to pay for that on an ongoing basis for operating expenses, almost $1 million a year. And I have seen no show of where that money's coming from, and it sure as heck's not coming from my pocket. So I don't even know if we're going to get the kindergarten center to free up any space, in which case my answer would totally change. Then I would probably reprioritize where I was adding space. And that's kind of where I'm stuck right now, is going, you know, as much as I would love to say, sure, let's just go ahead and we'll figure it out later, that's just irresponsible. So I'm really still struggling with, when we had that whole Sullivan Center schematic discussion, I'm still struggling with the fact that I don't know where this money's coming from. And I know that unfortunately the staff has heard some rumors that the board has already decided we're going to look for PE waivers and we're going to look for insurance cuts and all the rest of it. And honest to God, my hand to God, the board has not discussed any of that yet. So I apologize if the staff got that message. But we don't have a clue yet how we're going to pay for that. Maybe somebody does, but it hasn't been shared with us. So I'm not sure that I can even say priority is just on the middle school. Let's discard the STEM centers and go for that, because I just don't know that the kindergarten center is going to open. Other thing is, if I'm trying to think about it from the aspect of, if somebody were to say to us, here's $20 million, now spend it in order of priority, how would we spend that? And STEM centers certainly wouldn't be even in the top 3 for me. So by then you will have spent the 20 million, and I say that falls off. But I don't know, I'm kind of picking 20 million out of my head like Matt picked 25 out of his. I don't know what that magic number is. And maybe it's not about a number. Maybe it's about the community just believing that these are the needs and this is what's best going forward, and that everything's been thought of and that they've been clued in on it. It may be we could go for a bigger ask and be successful. I don't know. So,
Jason.
So we need to have some basis to move forward with the kindergarten center. So I understand you're hesitant, but if we don't make that assumption, how do we move forward? Because that's a huge variable.
I didn't want to move forward. That's what I'm saying.
It's like,
We wait.
if that's the only other option is to wait until the kindergarten's done, then we're going to be really late
I'm not
in
saying.
addressing some of the problems. I'm
Oh,
just
you're
trying
saying to go to referendum before?
No, addressing what needs we have, because if we assume that that's going through, that changes our priority. If we assume that that's not going through, that it changes our priority. Just a planning. That have nothing to do with the referendum. It's just planning how we're going to address our space needs, whether we're going to do something to elementary south or middle north or whatever other thing. We have to have some stake in the ground and saying, yeah, this is most likely going to go for it.
Oh, I totally agree. And if at the January 8th meeting, somebody brings me or brings us evidence that here's where we can come up with another $900,000 to $1 million a year without totally screwing over the staff and students, then I'd go, okay, that's our stake in the ground. Now I can believe that this kindergarten center can move forward without really having a majorly negative impact to the district. But right now, I literally don't know where this money's coming from. For all I know, they're going to cut the entire fine arts program. Like, I'm making that up. That's not what's happening, but I'm just saying I don't know what's happening. And I've asked for it, and I've asked for it, and we've asked for it, and here I am. So yeah, I'm happy to say, let's move forward at the kindergarten center as soon as I figure out where that money's going to come from, because I just can't even, when every time I look at the budget, I can't fathom where I can slice and dice and trim that amount of money every year.
Was that an ask for the administration to come up with that?
I already asked for that. We've asked for that. We asked for it in September. I asked for it again in future topics. I mean, I can't ask any more if nobody else wants. It's going to take a lot of time to come up with, and if that's not a priority, I thought we made it a priority at one point, but I'm personally not going to put my name on that kindergarten center plan and just go, well, we'll figure it out later. I'm not doing it.
I mean, and that's where I was at too, with just that we have so much going on that it's just really hard to focus and move forward. Like, I don't know why November has to be a hard line. I mean, I know we're crowded. I know we're just getting more crowded, but we do all this planning, and something changes, then it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, it's a waste of effort. It's just don't think that there's a clear way to go right now.
I think by January sometime, we'll have more certainty.
Then we can talk
So
about it
Nick's
then.
saying yes, but we can still talk about our priorities, even if we're not going to referendum. Priority's not going to change.
My understanding is that we weren't having a discussion just yet, so I'd like to hear the rest of Jason's comments.
So just purely looking at the numbers, the only building that is currently over current capacity is Middle North. So that one, if we take out, okay, this is where the kindergarten comes in. If we assume the kindergarten
Right.
building's there and those kindergartens are moved out based on the freed up space and looking at the enrollment number, every building will be below its capacity. We don't want to be at capacity, but they will be below capacity, except for Middle North. Right now, the latest number we had for Middle North was 672, and 650 was the stated capacity for Middle North. So that's the only one that is absolutely over capacity, then I think needs to be done. That's our highest priority, period. All the other ones have anywhere from 125 to 80 headroom between current enrollment and the capacity. So those could slide for a while, but the ones that are closer, south, middle south, has maybe a 75 student headroom there, so that's getting close, but it's not over capacity. Elementary south would be about the same, about 75 kids below capacity. All the other ones are over 100 kids below capacity. So
Well, my
and looking
understanding
at
is
just-
capacity is not really the same as how we're functioning programming
yes,
wise.
exactly.
Right.
But if we're looking at just that, Middle North is the one
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
is over. So
Oh, yeah.
we know for sure that's one that has to be addressed. That would be on the top of my priority. Question for Jason. When we had our plans and options, you've got dollar amounts for every one of these buildings in terms of 11 million for north, 3.9 for south, all that stuff. Are those, can we decouple those? In other words, can we do just the north and get close to that amount? I know these are all old estimates. But were there any connections between all the programs so that we couldn't just pull out north or pull out elementary south with those dollar amounts to do what's on here?
So there were some limited economies of scale, depending upon how the projects were phased. So if you note from the December presentation a year or so ago, I guess a year ago, we had phased them into sections, and those costs were generally coupled into those phases such that you'd achieve a modest economy of scale to do that work together. And so if you were to uncouple that, we would just have to analyze the phasing of those kinds of things and how many phases you'd create and how individualized you'd like to get with those projects and just update the numbers a little bit.
There's not a huge coupling, no.
I wouldn't characterize it as huge.
Okay. All right. So looking at individual buildings saying we want north, we want elementary south, we want this, we can pull it out and have each one have its own cost and pretty much go with those as our building up the building blocks to see how much we need.
Yeah, and prior to any referendum question, whatever date that might occur in the future, you would need to update the cost estimates.
Obviously. All I got.
Jeff?
I agree with Jason's earlier comments on Wes's in that we should prioritize the needs in the individual buildings and then all together for the district. I don't think that I'm in the best position to do that, but I think we as a board and we as a district need to do that and then see where the projects shake out and prioritize them. My question for Jason is, having led us through the process that came up with the Educational Facilities Master Plan and looking at the myriad of options, including off-site lease and and what we see on the plans, is there any benefit to revisiting any of those, or should we stick with what we have and prioritize what's on the plans that we have on the two options?
I think that's a really interesting question. You know, I was thinking about that on my drive over tonight, and I think that the adaptive reuse, if you had the right property, could be an attractive idea. The reason that fell out of favor in October of last year was the ongoing lease cost. And so one of the benefits of community collaboration at this point in a process is to go back and say, yes, we analyzed, a dozen or so options in total. And this was one that had some promise to it. Are there any ideas out there from developers or from real estate agents or from other places where you could find a property at a different value? And that would change the overall equation of that as an idea. That's what happened in as a part of Champagne's iterative process. When they went back out to the community, they had a chance to get the collective group think on what might be a good choice. Now, ultimately, they ended up staying on campus where they were, and but nevertheless, it was a value proposition that the community had posed and was answered through that process. I think that has some opportunity now, owing to some of the considerations of the village and traffic on Aspen Drive. Any additional growth on the South Campus would, be a challenge from a timing perspective. Not that can't be handled administratively through start times and things like that, but taking the growth and finding a place to accommodate it in a meaningful way that would be a little bit distant or remote physically from the existing campuses would be a benefit in that regard. So I think there are a few things that could be studied further, adaptive reuse being one.
Oh, so anything else, Jeff? No? Okay. One of the things was when we did look at it, I understand that the meetings were closed, they were not open to public, but everything that was discussed, because we weren't there on the committee, everything that went on in the meeting was told to the board. Our meetings are advertised and stuff. Maybe some of the details of it was lost in the back and forth or in our communication, but everything was done in the open. So that is one thing I just want to get out there. When we looked at it, when I was looking at this thing, one of the things was the option A. One of the things that is if we did go with school, it would be on the south of 60, and that is not something on Aspen Drive. That is something just seems to be a bit difficult. Adaptive reuse, one of the reasons we decided no was 70 was the price tag on it. Plus we were getting either not enough space or too much space. But like you said, we could revisit it and see if we got the right space for just the right amount of things that we wanted to do with it. My priority was, assuming that the kindergarten building went through, would be to do the middle schools. Breaking each building at a time, I don't think is very conducive because we have no money. So if we go out for 11 million, then we would have to go back again for 4 million a bit after that, then 5 million after that, and a 6 million after that. We would just be rolling it pretty much every other year doing the same thing because we have no money. We have to go out to get money from somebody to give us that. Unless somebody would write us a check, and we would be really, really thankful for that. In prioritizing it, I would say I would do the middle schools first, both of them. Whatever the needs are, take it from the administration, get them in what their needs are. Like Wes mentioned, capture all their needs and wants of the middle schools and do that as a first project. It gives us, the kindergarten center gives us some breathing room. Take that breathing room and at the same time start planning for what is coming for the elementary schools a bit after that. But then start with the middle schools right now. Go back and take it because that gives us a space. We would probably do it in 2 phases so that we are not going back to the community. Even if we are not the ones here, the school board, The district is not going out to the community every 2 years for asking for 6 million, 7 million, 8 million. After having depleted our reserves for the kindergarten center, we can't pay for it. So we would have to get the money from somewhere. That was how I prioritized it, saying, do the middle school, go for all of it with the middle school, whatever that amount comes out to. What with their wants, their needs, revisit everything that they need, and then go from there. That was my thing. Now, since Jason is here and we have, I think that's we spent about 25 minutes or so on this topic. Anybody want to add anything regarding the plans or any questions regarding architectural costs or options that were discussed and not waited out because somebody doesn't know that was an option considered or anything else for Jason before I move on to some of the community outreach and some of the ideas that people had from going to the IASB meeting?
Well, does it make sense if we're going to sort of reconsider adaptive reuse or at least get the community input on it? Does it make sense to first decide what program or what we would want in that building? Does it make sense to first decide that so we know what type of space we need? If we say we're going to have another K-5, well, it wouldn't be K-5, I guess at this point it'd be 1-5. If we're going to have another 1-5 center, that's one thing. If we're going to take dual language and give them their own building, that's another thing. If we're going to, bring back ECC pre-K, that's another thing. So does it make sense to sort of, if we're going to go at it, kind of put on our list, not to discuss tonight, but put on our list to sort of figure out first what we would want in that space or what the possible uses would be for that space. If we just say, oh, find us another space for 1 through 5, maybe it never finds the magical space, but maybe we can capture space by taking a specific program and moving it.
You want to say something?
True. You have to find out what you want to move or add. Owing to the conversation thus far, if middle school is a high priority, would you consider a middle school an adaptive reuse instead of a 1-5?
I'd consider anything.
Because Middle North in particular, the educational facility master plan included an addition onto that facility to support its needs, obviously, gymnasium and other things. And it's a pretty tight campus as it is. So if you could reduce enrollment effectively, you might find an opportunity in that.
I think everything's open for discussion.
So along those lines, back when I was coming to the EFMP meetings and things like that, I never really understood what the purpose of transplanting and building a new elementary south and not looking at some things like shifting some grades around, like, building another middle school or, maybe just changing the dynamics a little bit of maybe having a school that's 1 through 4 and then making the current middle school is like a 5-6 building and then building a 7-8 for everybody. Like, I don't know why some of those things, I mean, if they were.
They might have been.
They might have been,
They
but
could
it
have been on
But
the
that's what
cutting
I'm
room
saying.
floor.
I don't, I mean, like, those are some things that I would like to look at and like to see, but I don't know why decisions were made the way they were. So, kind of hard to know where to start.
I think some of the things with the adaptive reuse, I think that was one of the things was what was available. I think the two options that were presented to us was based on what was available and what would fit into that space. I think at one point, one was going to have a EC pre-K and the school and the whole of elementary south in it. The other one, because it was smaller, because in adaptive reuse, it's a size that is available.
Fixed.
And then you are fitting what your need is into that school.
Right, but I'm saying even if we're not even looking at adaptive reuse, let's say we're looking at Plan A where we built a whole new building on a separate plot of land, why it was transplanting a whole school. Like, I just never quite understood that.
I think the thrust of the master plan, so this is a great conversation. So the master plan sought to tackle many obstacles, one of them being growth, one of them being academic opportunity. And so you see that STEM has been talked about a lot so far this evening, and also your achievement gap was talked about a lot this evening. And so when you couple some of those academic opportunities and some of the enhancements that you can make for your students, STEM is an opportunity for them. It doesn't fit into the growth initiative, but it certainly fits in other ways academically. So you have to balance the plan in totality, and how you choose to implement it throughout time is, of course, up to you. The idea of a new facility wasn't to say that well, of course, you could move a whole attendance center if you really wanted to, but you could also build another something, whatever that might be, to support another programmatic need. It could have been a new middle school. It could have been a new anything. It was just an available attendance center to give the board flexibility in how you so chose to, and future boards so chose to distribute enrollment, whether it be through a different academic model, whether it be a K-8, we talked about that, whether it be other opportunities academically. So it was just a way to expand your footprint to give you that flexibility.
Some of there were two buildings. One was big enough for kindergarten as an adaptive reuse, but not big enough for more. Another building was almost twice the size of what we would have needed. So you would have leased a building and had more in there.
An adaptive reuse was actually less expensive to construct, more
You just have to
expensive
find a building to
lease.
buy and not lease.
Yeah, the lease is what raised the price of that idea to the point where it was, I don't remember the cost.
And we couldn't buy. I mean, there
There wasn't really an option to buy. There was one opportunity to buy, but it wasn't large enough
after.
to meet a need.
I thought it was after many years, though. It wasn't like right away.
No, that's what she said is
Yeah.
like, we look need for something to buy. We didn't
Right.
have the money to buy
Right.
or, redo anything. The buying was not an option. It was, and that was the problem with the adaptive reuse. The land was only one land. So now we don't have any land right now. So that
I'm
is
saying
the,
even if we acquire that land from the park district and would build something new there, I said I never understood why it was transplanting a whole school.
We get it. We just don't know. We weren't on the committee either, so we were getting summaries of what was considered and discarded and all that stuff, but I don't know that any of us would be able to reiterate in detail everything that landed on the floor. So to
I think I'm going to save the rest of my comments for when we go to prioritized outreach.
so. The next kind of what we want to touch was, one was the building. So right now, as far as we stand, it looks like everybody seems to prioritize that middle schools need to be the one touch. Whether it's Middle North, we do it separately, Middle South, we'll have the discussion for the next meeting, how we want to do it, of what we want to do. The other thing was prioritize the outreach. So, Wes, you want to start?
Yes. At Triple I, again, one of the things that Champaign District 4 did that seemed to be pretty successful the third time around was open it up to the community. They did they record their meetings?
They
or
recorded everything.
were they
recorded-
live though?
Some were live.
Some were live. So the community was able to see and hear what was going on. And they, for this committee, they reached out to everyone. So, if we were to do something along those lines, I would say we need to reach out to all of our elected officials. They might not personally be able to come, but maybe they could send a staffer. Our villages, the village of Vernon Hills, Mundelein, Libertyville, Mettawa, Indian Creek, our townships, Vernon Township, Libertyville Township. I know we have other ones, the park districts, the library boards, the Chamber of Commerce. If we want to maybe consider the adaptive reuse, maybe there's somebody involved in the Chamber of Commerce that might know of something that's not even listed as available. We don't know, but we have to get the word out. The Lake County Board, even groups such as the Lions Club, real estate agents, developers. These are just some of the people that, off the top of my head, I thought would be a good fit. I also think now that we have the Education Foundation tying into that, and possibly, if we have, there's, Little Lake County is one site that I think gets a lot of traction. And, any other bloggers or social media influencers that have a base in Hawthorne 73.
Julie? We'll go back to Triple I. Referencing Skokie 73 and a half. They had the community involved in a lot of the planning. Their committees weren't just like two selected people. They had a lot of people. It was people who were in favor, people who were opposed. And I know we have these meetings and nobody comes, but when we had the EFMP meetings, they were well attended. So doing something like that and separating it and making it available to the public, I think will help. And, using your allies, your people who support in the community to help spread the word. I guess last time, maybe like a month before, there was a committee doing things, but before really even like the planning and moving forward, they had a group of people, trying to educate the community with the right facts. And it wasn't just coming from us, it was coming from other community members. Let me think what else was going on there really quick. I still stuck on the fact from them that they said that before they even decided to move forward at all, they asked the community what they thought, if the schools were crowded or not crowded, and they said there was nobody who was going to deny that the schools were crowded, that was a fact. But if the community said it's crowded, don't do anything, they wouldn't have done anything. I think we need to go back out and we did the survey, and I know Sonali and Robin spent a ton of time responding to everybody, and it had to be done, and I really appreciate the time you guys put in. But do we know if that had any impact on anybody's thoughts? So maybe trying to gauge that. Because I feel like a lot of the information the first time around was said and not a lot of it changed. And it was said and said and said, and it didn't change anybody's minds. So if it's going to be the same thing again, we have to figure out a different way. I yield.
Matt?
Got it covered.
Robin?
Yeah, in addition to what Wes and Julie said, which I think they both made great points. I think I would also, to echo what Wes had said earlier, I think I would leave all those planning meetings open, because what's the harm? Even if nobody shows, it just shows a different level of transparency to make it such that they could have come. And then it would be up to them if they decided they wanted to go back and look at the video and see whether or not an idea was thought of or considered or why it was discarded. And I do think it's a great idea to sit down with the entire community and say, okay, we read your surveys, we heard your feedback. Give us your answer of where we go from here. What would be your ideal plan? And then to the best of our abilities, find consensus where we can and go from there. Because ultimately, if this is not what people want their schools to look like, they're not going to support it. So I do think it's a good question to ask. I think it's worth taking the time to do that and finding out where our resources are as far as other people in the community, like you said. I sat in that same thing at Triple I that Wes and several of us did, and that was definitely a big point to them, was how many people were involved with all different perspectives and how important that was to the process. So, I do think that that's probably valuable to, really get the community involved on a different level this time and not hand select a committee until everybody's sort of had their chance to be heard, whether they show up or not. And these other districts that were successful, they were having a lot more community gatherings. They were having a lot more two-way communication between not just putting a plan out there, but hearing the feedback as they were going. And I think we sometimes sit there and go, well, what's it worth if nobody shows up? But I think we really need to make it such that they can show up before it gets to the point of just, here's the plan, take it or leave it.
Can I add one thing really quick? Sorry. That's kind of what I was trying to say last week, was to try to get the community involved beforehand. But I also just want to say that we could go about it however we want, and the referendum could pass 51% to 49%. And that would be great because we solve a lot of our problems, but it doesn't solve like the bigger issue of that we have with the community. Because there's still 49% of the people who either aren't believing us or aren't trusting us. And so, I mean, yeah, we get our point accomplished, but I'd rather, work on something really hard, work on the community outreach, and have like a referendum pass by obviously 100%, but I mean, I'd be happy with 60 or 70, something, that really shows we're making ground.
It's a good point, and I do agree with you, but and not that we can't set our bar higher than what is the average, but on average, these referendums don't pass by a landslide. They pass by really narrow margins. The ones that do pass. I mean, even Champaign, it was not a victory to go bragging about. It was just a victory,
But I'd like to keep our goals.
It would be nice, the higher you set your
We can aim
standards.
high. Nothing wrong with
Aim
that.
high. That's the only way to achieve.
Jason?
The only point I want to clarify is when you guys talk about community involvement, there's two ways there. I don't want a committee of 100 working on the plan. I just don't think that's doable. Having the planning done in the open so that people can watch is one thing, but having them actively involved where one week you've got 20 people, next week you've got 10 other different people, and another third week you've got, so I just want to understand what you guys are thinking about when
I'm
you
sorry.
say open to the community.
I don't think I
What do you mean?
really painted a picture well. I think what I'm picturing is maybe for the first 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how many sort of different times a day you want to offer it, have the opportunity that everybody just come, give their inputs, like throw down anything, no matter how stupid you think it sounds, no matter how silly you think it is. Throw down all of your ideas of, if I could paint the picture of my perfect school district, here's what it would look like.
Okay.
Then take that to a committee that stays available to the open. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't think you can have a committee of more than, 15 or 20 working on this max.
Yeah,
Even that's
okay.
a lot of
So
voices.
And I mean, I don't know how you get this side to be involved, but from what I heard from the other districts was that they had people who supported full expansion of whatever everybody wanted, and there was people who still didn't really believe in it and didn't want to do it at all. But they were still willing to volunteer their time and
to do what? To work
To help.
on the actual plan, even though they didn't want it.
And I mean, we're not talking about 100, but maybe instead of 2, maybe
But-
5 or 6.
I understand. Just when Wes was reading off all the people that we can invite, I didn't know
Well,
whether you
no,
meant
these were
get
just-
those people involved in the planning, or-
Not everyone. Just
Okay.
as these were more possible ideas of people that we within our community that we can reach out to.
as part of the
To
first
put
part.
the word out, I
Yeah.
think, is more
Okay.
to put the word out, to get involved, to spread
More
the
of like a
message.
PR.
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
what we're doing.
I wasn't sure whether.
Yeah, no, Champagne
talking
sort of
about-
described as they used, they went to literally they had a board member at literally every function going on in town. The church bingo night, the Lions Club meeting, and basically use the connections at those as the opportunity to present the message. And it was one more group you could reach because it's really hard for us to reach the people that don't have children in the district. But
It's
they're a
almost-
humongous
so
portion of the
you're saying
voters.
It's almost like flipping what we did. See, before we got the community together, kind of came up with a plan, then presented it to the community. What you're suggesting is go out to the community, all these people, get everything you can get from them, feed that to the committee, and then have them work on the plan. Is that different than what we did last time?
Well, yes,
We had,
but I don't think you're going to get a different result.
Well, we haven't. I mean,
Oh, well,
there,
we're not
there
going to
is
get a
an
different
issue.
result. We don't need to do any of this.
There's an issue.
Not on the referendum, but a different result on a plan.
on the plan, because there's two.
And you
gonna
might
get a-
not,
you're
but then
gonna
you get a
get a
different
very
buy-in on
similar-
the plan.
Right. We
I think
want to
that
get the
that's-
buy-in.
I think you have to take all of the referendum examples with a little bit of perspective, because Champaign was a special circumstance with a very specific set of community concerns and a very specific set of leaders. If you look at North Shore 112 as an example, they had an exhaustive community engagement process.
It didn't go so
Didn't
well.
matter. If you look at some of the, I can show you many examples, pro and con, of lots of different things. I think it's just finding the perspective that works for your community. You know your community. You know the kinds of things that they can do to contribute, the kinds of things that they can do to add value. That's what you should harness. That's what you should capture. Their creative ability to help you solve a problem. I don't know that the outcome of the plan itself would have been different or would be different if you did it again. There's a lot of perspective out there.
And it might not be different. I think there's just a different message and sense of this is our plan as a board versus this is our plan as a community. And I think there's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of the Champaign thing. You know it much better than I do, even after having listened to their discussion. But I think there's just, if somebody knew, I've been heard, this idea has been considered, and I had a chance to give my feedback. So now I trust that it's been thought of and considered. You know, it's just, I think it's a different level of engagement and communication.
Jeff?
I don't really have anything to add to what's already been said.
Okay. If there is any, it's 9:44 and we have action items to go through. So I'm going to cut this off because we'll come back to this discussion. It's a ongoing discussion, as I said. But since we have Jason here, so with any perspective on this, plan, outreach, he has all the things. It's not that we can't send our emails to him or messages to him to get his perspective. But since he's here and he spent this time, if there's anything from his experience that you want to know about community outreach or pros and cons of doing it or a direction, anything, now would be the time to ask.
I've got a question. Refresh my memory, because this was probably when you first started with us. Is there an advantage to doing an April referendum over a November referendum? Is one more likely to be successful for some reason and one's not?
I can tell you that the more well-attended election is typically one that is more successful for school districts. So typically the
November.
local elections are not successful for school districts.
So we're probably better sticking with the November of 18 plan.
Yeah, although this year or last presidential election was so polarizing for many people that it caused a lot of typical things not to occur, if you will. And so I don't know that we can draw anything from that. Other than the recommendations that I always get from the experts in the industry is go to the most well-attended elections.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, please email them to Nick and Jason so we can get you some answers. If there's any perspective you're looking for, we will take up this discussion. It'll be an ongoing discussion every meeting to talk about it. The next, that's the conclusion of the committee as a whole. Going to have the business meeting started. Anybody from the public wishes to comment? I had two people, I lost them. You have the consent agenda, which is board minutes from November 27th, closed session minutes from November 27th, the Amex report, the expenditure report from December, leave of absences, retirements, a termination, and a new hire. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by motion by Judy, seconded by Robin. Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Jason Tron.
Aye.
Julie Simpson.
Aye.
Jeff Bard.
Aye.
Robin Cleek.
Aye.
Wes Bowen. Aye. Matt Jacobs.
Aye.
Nolly Patel.
Aye. Motion passes 7 ayes, 0 nays. The next action item is the student fees for 2018-19, which was just presented by Abe. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the student fees for the 2018-2019 school year as presented.
Motion by Julie. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Julie, seconded by Matt. Any discussion? Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Matt Jacobs.
Aye.
Robin Cleek.
Aye.
Jeff Bard.
Aye.
Julie Simpson.
Aye.
Jason Tron.
Aye.
Natalie Patel.
Aye.
West Pole, aye.
Motion passes 7 ayes, 0 nays. The next, that's it. President's report. I have nothing to report other than, does anybody have anything to add from their governmental entities that they're monitoring, or anything come up in any of your minutes or agendas? Anybody have anything to add?
No.
No, it's all been quiet. That's good. Superintendent's report.
Yeah, just a couple of things real quick. We did have a Palm and Cheer invitation on Friday. Middle School North's Cheer won first and Palms won second. Middle School South on Saturday, their cheer team competed at Round Lake School with their full team, and their cheer squad took first place. We're excited for their cheerleaders, and all of our cheerleaders were working hard. Also on Saturday, the Palms attended the high school competition at Vernon Hills High School, and they performed in an exhibition performance at the event. All in attendance were left in awe as the Palms squad put on a display that rivaled many of the high school performances. There's a nice article in your packet about Mary Benton, Middle School South art teacher. She's being recognized by the Daily Herald. We appreciate that and all that she does, and all that all our art teachers do. 12:13 is an early release day. 12:20, middle school sing-along at Elementary South, 9 to 9:45. 12:22 through 1:05 is winter break. There's no school, and the offices will be have special hours or closed, depending on our vacation schedules. School resumes on January 8th, 2018.
Any topics for future discussion?
When are we going to do the closed session to develop the metrics for Nick's goals?
The January.
January close, was that ever decided on?
No, but you got the invite for the closed sessions, right? So,
I did.
yes, the January 5th closed session.
I know you asked about it, I just didn't remember seeing one
No,
that was
I didn't.
confirmed.
I didn't put in the agenda together as yet, but that's what.
No, I'm just saying I didn't see that date was confirmed.
Either.
Yeah, I just saw a request.
I just saw a request, I just
Yeah,
didn't see
so
that.
I was still
Okay.
waiting for some.
So that
people
is
to-
confirmed
Yes, that
in the
is
evening?
confirmed.
Okay.
Yes.
Which day?
January 5th.
January 5th.
Are you going to be here?
Friday?
I know
Yes,
he said
it's a Friday.
reluctantly.
Now Jason is going to try to convince us he has a life on Friday nights.
We all do.
I don't.
Jason, what time can you make it? Jason, Jeff, Matt, anybody who can make it earlier so we don't make it a late night?
I can make it earlier.
Check. Depends on whether I work.
What time are we looking at?
That's why I'm waiting for him
6
to.
is about the earliest I can.
6?
Can do 6.
Okay, 6.
I can do earlier.
6. Matt, 6 is the earliest, so
6 o'clock.
Unless you want me to eat in front.
that's fine.
I
You can.
always eat.
We can all eat, so the earlier
That's
the better.
fine. I mean, if you want to do it at 5,
I think 5 sounded hard for Jason. Didn't it?
Hold on.
Jason.
Hold on.
Which day?
January 5th.
Jason's cat moved.
Probably do 5:30.
Okay, we'll take you.
5:30.
Even better.
5:30.
Can you do 5:30?
5:30. Please bring your dinner. Or send Matt the order. Anything else?
I wanted to maybe discuss of whether we should have slides and reports for some things. I mean, I know outside things we can't control. a time frame before the meetings. We have enough time to look at them, prepare questions, send our questions so our questions can be answered. If anybody else had any interest in that, I just want to talk about that.
They normally come with a board packet unless there is an exception to the rule. They most of the times come by Friday. So do you want them before Friday or do you?
Well, there's a lot that's slipping over the weekend, though.
They don't, like, I don't know why, like, we say that they always do that, they don't. I mean, that's what, can we just make it a topic for future discussion and discuss it later?
Okay.
Like to set a deadline by like Saturday at 5 or.
Right.
I'm happy to discuss it.
Okay.
I wanted to set it for future to discuss, not discuss now.
Yeah.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Robbins, seconded by Julie. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes 7 ayes, 0 nays. Thank you, everybody.
So hungry.
Molly, do I need to sign?
Yes,
Oh, thank
of course. There's not a lot though, just
Julie.
a couple.
Hold on, I want to take that coat so I can drop